Cain was born a prince, but fate had already marked him as a dangerous villain destined to bring about the destruction of the world and his own downfall. Observe the young man before him from above, his own grandson. That man's name was Reinhard Bucklid. With an imposing presence, the king declared, quality was evident to a trained eye. With a single blow, the sword shattered into pieces. The man's face paled. Despite being a replica, he observed several people on a monitor, wondering if you, presumably a superior force, never tire of sending guardians after them. In this, dreaming, Cain is observing a futuristic landscape on a giant monitor and finds it irritating. The scene then shifts to the people Cain had been watching. Two figures in virtual reality gear are struggling to reach the core of a hacker, just as one of them announces their arrival. A wind of data, composed of operating systems and information, manifests itself, alarming them. They identify it as a data storm. Frustrated that their target is so close but blocked by the storm, one of them urges the others to continue onward while they deal with the interference. As the time is running out, it's emphasized that the person who struck the captain to force their departure knows the world is running out of time. The captain reluctantly departs. Swearing to take care of the damn hacker, Cain praises them for their noble sacrifice. Then, he declares that there is no time for games and bids farewell to the Guardians. As the digital figure is consumed by the storm of green data, disappearing in glitches, Cain, with the loading bar completely full, dressed in a futuristic suit, he confirms the materialization of Metatron, the city, and says goodbye to the infernal Metatron. It is then revealed that it was World 819, where Cain was a hacker, a genius who took control of the cyber world. His goal was to erase the defective real world, and the sword shouldn't have broken so easily. The fact that it shattered with a single strike left him utterly stunned and visibly concerned. Replace it with his ideal virtual utopia, bringing the imagery of cyberspace to physical reality. He welcomes an unseen entity into a paradise built. And that's how World 89 was destroyed by him. The scene shifts to the princess, who had believed that Cain's ability to see the fate of the great evil stemmed from absorbing mana from evildoers, but then she recalls a peach scent she had smelled previously. She remembers that aroma was present in the central continent when Cain first foresaw the fate of the great evil, at a time when he hadn't yet absorbed any mana of that kind. Her thoughts are interrupted when Nariel rushes in, urgently calling for her and reporting that Lorcan and Soren's ship has been attacked by a sea monster. Nariel adds that both of them are missing. Shocked and distraught, the princess orders Nariel to immediately dispatch a team of search, which she accepts. The princess tries to convince herself that Cain and Soren must be all right. Meanwhile, Cain wakes up on a beach, complaining about another nightmare. He reflects on the hacker, one of the most formidable individuals among the 99 worlds, someone that not even his grandfather was able to defeat. He is concerned about the possibility that the hacker's power may have been transferred to someone else. Soren approaches him, noticing that he is awake. He even found his sword, Mistil. Cain asks her if she managed to defeat the monster by herself. Soren explains that, after the monster threw him into the sea, then, Kale appeared, wooden staff in hand, demanding to know what the hell was going on. His anger wasn't directed at Cain, but it died on its own, perhaps in a last, desperate effort. Cain wonders why the monster didn't kill him when it had the chance, and why. He specifically said, "Take him with you," clearly suspecting a hidden motive. While they are eating, Cain nonchalantly remarks that the monster has already been dealt with, and suggests that they should continue onward. He then inquires if there's a way to leave the island. Next, we see them aboard a ship called the Joris, located in South, without asking where the ship originated. Recognizing it as a magically engineered vessel from the third continent, Cain explains that his grandfather gifted it to him. Sin marvels at the mimics, creatures capable of storing incredibly large objects, while observing one of them sleeping. Then, Cain reveals to him that, because they are living beings, even they can become ill. Cain mentions that his mana is recovering and will be fully restored in approximately 4 hours, considering that they need to arrive at announcing their destination before nightfall. Cain states that the ship's speed will increase. When Surin asks how fast the ship can travel, Cain tells her she will see shortly and orders the Jerai's magical engine to go to maximum power. The boat accelerates dramatically, causing Soren to scream in surprise. They soon arrive at a dark and unfamiliar coastline on the third continent. Feeling dizzy, Sauron declares that she will never board that ship again, and questions the legality of disembarking without going through a port, likening it to smuggling. Cain explains that, having lost their identification, they had no other option. directly at the store employee. Kale was furious. They weren't supposed to be selling such low-quality replicas, and now he understood that the Sarin points out that it will be difficult to move around the third continent without papers, and asks him about his plan. Kane assures her that he knows a runner who can, falsifying IDs, which surprises Sauron given his connections. Then, she remembers that the third continent is divided into zones based on wealth, which Kane confirms. Zone 1 is for the elite, Zone 2 is for the middle class, and Zone 3 is where the majority of the population lives. While they walk through a rundown area, Sauron assumes they are in Zone 3, but Kane corrects her and leads her down an alleyway. Sauron complains about the foul odor, saying that she had heard Zone 3 was at least habitable, but this place is far worse. Then, Kane reveals that they are not actually in Zone 3. Suddenly, Sauron spots a collapsed child, but Kane quickly stops her and warns her not to approach. Sauron protests, as she doesn't want to, leaving behind a sick child, but Kane sadly informs her that the child is already dead. Confused, Sauron asks, "What do you mean by that?" Kane explains that the boy was addicted to electronic drugs and is currently brain dead, likely after consuming a substance believing that it would transport him to the virtual world. He warns that these addicts release toxins and suggests they take a detour to avoid them. Then, the boy's body disappears into thin air. Horrified, Sauron asks if even children are using drugs, and if that's how people live in Zone 3. Kane reiterates that this place is not Zone 3. Rumors about their defective weapons might be true. The man tried to shift the blame to Kane, but Senia stopped him. This incident couldn't be. He clarifies that it is not officially recognized and that even he and his grandfather felt threatened while there. He reveals that it's the lawless land known as the dark side of the third continent, a territory of outlaws. As he explains this, several people begin to surround them. Shortly after, as they walk, a voice calls out to them. A group of thugs, led by a smiling man, confronts them and asks them to come closer. The leader, noticing Sauron's expression, comments that her grumpy face ruins her beauty and says that if they cooperate, they will be spared. Sauron, tired, comments that she is already fed up with hearing the same thing, and that this is the 9th group to bother them. The leader, annoyed by her defiant attitude, tells her that he had intended to show them compassion. He then pulls out a saber and asks them if they have ever seen a sword breaker, a weapon that destroys other swords. Sauron, unimpressed, says, "I had already heard that as well." With a swift movement, his sword destroys the leader's sword and takes him out. The stunned gang members fight back, but in the end, they all fall dead. Kane suggests that they leave before more show up, but another voice calls out to them, a burly man with cybernetic implants, standing in front of a store with a sign that reads, "Forum," tells them that leaving trash in front of his establishment is a problem. He surprises Sauron by disappearing and reappearing directly behind her. He places his hand on her shoulder and asks if she has never heard of a superhuman. He clarifies that he doesn't like to bully children and orders them to clean up their mess and leave immediately. Overlooked, and the employee would have to face the consequences for tarnishing the store's reputation. They took him away, presumably to make him pay for. Sauron asks what superhumans are, and Kane explains that they are warriors from the third continent, enhanced with cybernetics or drugs. He then greets the man, offering to pay for the cleanup with money he received from a previous job. The man, initially confused, at first, he recognizes Kane and calls him Uncle Ye. Internally, Kane confirms that Ye is the runner, known as the King of Outlaws, the person he has been searching for. Inside Ye's establishment, which resembles a vast casino, he orders someone to clean up the bodies, observing that their limbs are still intact. The subordinate confirms that he will call the scavengers. He then asks where they should escort Kane and Sauron, but Ye tells them to go to Squarm, the VIP room without an escort, and to just prepare the drinks, 2 glasses of juice, and the best quality oil. As they walk, Sauron comments on how quickly the bodies vanished. Ja explains that this is how outlaws work, as corpses with limbs have numerous uses, and offers to explain to Sauron what those uses are, but she refuses. In the VIP room, Ja asks Kane why he's seeking him out now, remarking that Outlaw hasn't changed much in the last 7 years. Kane tells him he needs a fake ID because he lost his and has to meet someone on the third continent. Ja scoffs, saying, "That's a pretty flimsy reason," and tells him to go home, asserting that the third continent is no place for naive kids right now. Their actions. Even as they dragged him away, the man kept muttering that it was all Kane's fault. Kane, still standing calmly, reiterated that, regardless, sensing something is amiss, Kane asks if something's going on. Ja replies that it's none of their business, but Kane says he'll find out for himself regardless. Hai sighs. Calling him troublesome, Kane finally reveals that a war is about to erupt on the third continent, which greatly surprises Sin. Kane then comments that in 99 worlds, there has never been a war during this period. Kane confirms that Karlon, the Lord of the Eastern Clockwork Tower, and Serena Soret, the Witch of the Central Clockwork Tower, Central Mechanics, are in conflict with each other. He explains that Serena has rapidly expanded her influence over the last 3 years and is the first genius to unify the continent under a single central rule, which makes her a threat to the Lord of the East. Kane reflects, noting that he knew Serena was active and that Starfish had told him about her, wondering if his interference had altered the course of events. Then, he asks, Jess does plan to stop the war. Hai feigns surprise and asks why she would do that. Kane points out that if a war breaks out, the third economy will suffer. The continent will collapse and will already suffer great losses, in addition to losing its customers in the first district, whose contracts are a major source of income. He dismisses it, saying that the first district won't fall just because of a war, and that everything will return to normal once it's over. However, Kane is not agreed. He states that once the war is over, he will no longer be the king of Outlaw. Surin is surprised and asks what he means. Kane explains that although, no matter how much money he had, he still wouldn't have bought a weapon in that store. Kale raised an eyebrow and asked if he really said that. When Kane confirmed it, both lords of the Clockwork Towers are militarily equal, but the Eastern faction has more influence. This means that if war breaks out, the other lords will likely side with the East, which gives him a key advantage. He continues by saying that the ultimate goal of the Lord of the Mechanical Tower, for the last 30 years, their goal has been the complete eradication of Outlaw. Once the war concludes, they plan to wipe Outlaw off the map entirely. Ja recognizes Kane's sharpness and admits that he has already taken measures to halt the war. He asks Kane not to interfere and to simply return home, but Kane refuses and offers his assistance. Ja questions why he would involve himself in a war that isn't his. Kane reveals that he came to meet Serena Sorer. Soren is surprised to learn that Kane is trying to meet with the Lady of the Central Mechanical Tower. Kane confirms that this is the case and declares that he cannot allow her to die. Ja, understanding that Kane has his reasons, Sauron agrees to help him, but with one condition. In the following scene, we see Kane and Sauron in a crowded casino. Kane comments on how much the place has grown in the past 7 years. Sauron, now wearing a mask like Kane, points out that the capital is on another level entirely. Kane reflects on the casino, which is now being used as a testing ground, and states that he doesn't need any half-hearted reinforcements at this stage. The condition, and, Kane remembers, is that Sauron will only help him if he passes a test. Go to Metatron's casino, eliminate a target, and recover a data chip that the target carries. With a simple yes, Kale placed the staff back on his back and remarked that he had high expectations for him. After all, Kane had brought with him. The target is Tagon, the Vice Lord of the Eastern Mechanical Tower. Hyla warned him to remember the name, as failure would mean expulsion. Immediately from the third continent, Kane, considering the mission not particularly difficult, accepted it. As they walk through the casino, Sauron, he bumps into a blonde woman, apologizing profusely and asking if she is all right. Surprisingly, the woman is Serena, the very person Kane was looking for. She downplays its importance, but then, surprising Sauron, she tells him that it's good manners to remove your mask when apologizing. Serena playfully lifts the mask and comments that she knew it all along. She asks his name, and Sauron stutters. Ryu? Serena comments that the name doesn't suit him at all, and asks Kane for his name. Kane introduces himself as Jay Rondo from the First Continent. Kane seems confused, as Serena appears to know him already. To Soren, even though this is supposedly their first meeting. Then, she introduces herself as Serena Sor. Soren, surprised, asks if she really is the Lady of the Central Mechanical Tower. Serena confirms this, and suggests that since fate has brought them together, they should travel together. However, Kane rejects the offer, claiming that he has urgent matters to attend to. Internally, he thinks that he must complete Jay's mission first. Despite having many questions, Serena comments that she doesn't believe he would lose anything by staying with her. Suddenly, a man appears, escorted by armed guards, shouting, "Witch! Witch!" The man, a gift from an old friend. With a laugh, Kale told him to act as if none of this had happened, and presented him with a sword as a reward. One of the, with black hair is Digel, Kane's target. Digel confronts Serena and asks her why she is there. She responds sarcastically, asking if he isn't allowed to be in a casino. Kane and Sauron, observing the scene, realize that he is their target. Serena tells Digel that she only wants to talk and asks him to take him to a private room, urging him not to get nervous. Digel warns her not to be arrogant. Serena then turns her attention to Kane and Sauron, suggesting that they accompany them as well. Once in the private room, Sauron wonders what is happening, and Kane advises him to just observe for now. Digel, reclining casually, comments with disdain that the central mechanical tower must be struggling financially if they are hiring rookies as guards, referring to Kane and Sauron, the latter of whom isn't even a superhuman. But Serena ignores him, touches her bracelet, and says, "That will be enough." Digel, annoyed at being ignored, asks if he's not even listening. Then, he's surprised to see the room fill with digital windows and asks if Serena took control of the system and how she did it. Serena calmly replies, "Just now," and presents him with a compiled proposal for him to read. Digel finds the document to be too long and asks for a summary. Serena, feigning annoyance, calls him an idiot for not understanding, even after she simplified it. In short, she proposes reaching a compromise and ending the conflict. She concedes that if a confrontation occurs, she would probably win, but there would be inevitable damage, that the child would one day become an unprecedented villain. His words weighed like iron, foretelling a dark destiny that transcended even the three best currently on display. He instructed Kane to take the sword and leave. Since Kane didn't respond immediately, Kale assumed he hadn't. Digel scoffs and asks if she really thinks she can defeat the combined forces of the North, South, East, and West. Serena, he replies that even if they add the port city, they still wouldn't stand a chance against her, and he knows this very well, which is why he tried to provoke a conflict internal to the central mechanical tower. Piggle is visibly shocked when Serena reveals her plan to expose her origins as an outlaw in order to divide the central tower. She asserts that the problem he has with her is simply due to her place of birth. Internally, Piggle panics, knowing that only he, the Lord of the Tower, and 3 other people knew that information, and he wonders if there's a spy among them. Serena asks him if he is curious to know who betrayed him, but Piggle dismisses it as an attempt to sow discord. Serena retorts that they were the ones who started it themselves, and since they are in a casino, he proposes resolving the issue with a game. If Digel wins, she will reveal the traitor. In exchange, if she wins, he must hand over the data chip and its decryption key. Digel, surprised that she knows so much, refuses, saying that even though finding the traitor is important, the chip is worth more. Serena relents slightly, allowing him to choose a game he feels confident in. She then declares that Sauron will play in her place, much to the surprise of the latter. Digel questions Serena's sanity, but seeing that she insists, he agrees to settle the matter with poker. Sauron protests, saying that she has never liked the sword and that he was being sarcastic. Thinking that Kale considered her unworthy, she looked a little upset. Kane quickly apologized, admitting, heard of poker, but Serena reassures her, telling her to just watch and learn while she explains the basics. Kane, paying close attention, asks Serena if she seems certain about all of this. Serena, in turn, asks Kane if he isn't too close to sin, revealing that she knew his name all along. Rondo was just an alias. Kane, worried internally, wonders if they have also uncovered his real identity. He recalls that the starfish data listed him as dead, so they shouldn't suspect that he is still alive. He then questions whether it was reckless to leave the game to Soren, who is a novice, but Serena tells him not to worry, explaining that poker relies on luck. Besides, Serene never loses at games of chance. When the game gets underway, Serene appears confused, but then starts winning, again and again. After the 5th straight win, Serena tells the frustrated Digel that it's time to make good on his promise. His promise. Furious at having lost to a mere hatchling, Digel orders his guards to kill them all. Serena tells Kane that she's leaving the rest to him, since intervening could lead to false accusations, and asks Soren to accompany her. Soren, confused about how Serena knows her name, is reassured by her. Serena assures Kane that she will take care of Soren. Kane draws his weapon, which Serena recognizes as Mistil 10. Digel launches himself at him, boasting that he can handle Kane. Kane observes the enemy's swordbreaker and anticipates a dodge and a counterattack, but that his previous words might have sounded derogatory. He explained that he never meant to insult Kale's weapons. He was just stating a fact. It wasn't. Instead, he pierces straight through the guard with his wooden sword, which clashes against the enemy weapon. The guard mocks Kane for using such a simple weapon. In a close-quarters fight, Taro Ken reveals his preference for wooden swords, quickly disarming and defeating his opponent, remarking that he is no ordinary boy. They begin shooting at him, and while dodging the bullets, Kane trips over another attacker who assaults him with an LK-22, which Kane deems obsolete, and defeats him. Quickly defeats both of them. Kane warns the fallen LK-22 user to be careful, because once activated, that weapon cannot be stopped. He notes that the Team Gidamir 4 guard is already dead. Another enraged guard attacks him with an LK-23, utilizing cores in his torso and right arm. Kane explains that this provides greater power, but it becomes dangerous when the mana from both cores collides. He strikes the guard, causing an internal explosion. Just as he predicted, the Provolem a guard explodes. Kane approaches Serena and asks if she's injured. Serena, sitting on Digel, confirms that she managed to retrieve the chip without any damage and hands it over to Kane. She then says that, more importantly, she never expected Kane Bonaclit to still be alive. Kane wonders internally how she found out. Serena suggests they leave first and continue the conversation outside. As they're walking, the doors suddenly slam shut, trapping them inside. Serena curses the bastard for interfering even at the very end, and demands that Digel open the barrier. Digel accuses her of taking control of only about the swords in that store. Even some of the most famous swords could not withstand his strength. To prove it, he brandished the sword. Serena, questioning who else could have done it, decides to check from the outside and orders all the central protective barriers to be opened. Her device, the wrist device, with a voice that sounds almost human, confirms the order's execution with an estimated time of 1 minute. Kane asks if it's a completely autonomous AI. Serena asks him how he knows that information, considering that classification isn't yet public. Kane thinks to himself that autonomous AIs hadn't been widely implemented at that point in time. Pressuring him, Serena demands to know his true identity. Her device reports that, with the current output of the simplified terminal where the core is located, it's impossible to seize control. The AI detects the reactivation of 5 dormant superhumans due to a perceived threat, and warns Serena to evacuate immediately, as they are surrounding the room. The AI reports that the 5 superhumans were only supposed to be reactivated if the central command network was in danger, which shouldn't be happening. As the superhumans attack, Serena tells everyone to get behind her and then shouts, "Stand behind her," and then shouts. Framer activates a defensive barrier that repels the attackers and causes a minor impact. Kane observes that Elis has a mana amplification ability, not an attack, and wonders if it's similar to his own. He deduces that the superhumans are likely immune to mana-based attacks. Serena confirms that there isn't total immunity and suggests leaving the explanation to Digel, while that had been given to him, and, just as before, it broke instantly. Kale was shocked, finally understanding that Kane's strength was so enormous that she deals with the superhumans. She orders her AI to open slot number 2. The AI obeys, aims at the superhuman's line of sight, and attempts to eliminate one. It then reports that an EMP pulse is interfering with its connection to the control system, and it initiates a system shutdown. Suddenly, many weapons emerge, all pointed at them. Digel, seeing this, exclaims that they're done for since there are too many enemies. If it were just Kane, alone, he could try to face them with his sword. However, a single mistake could result in the death of the witch and Sauron. There's only one option left. Kane decides to use his mana and creates an absolute shield that covers them, blocking all attacks. Serena, witnessing this, recognizes the absolute shield and can't believe that he can even use 9th level circles. Kane asks how long it will take for his system to recover because he plans to buy them some time, blocking the attacks. But suddenly, Sauron leaps into action, determined to prove her existence with her sword. With a single strike, she eliminates them all, leaving the room in silence and surprising everyone with her strength. However, she then collapses. We then see that she is having a dream. She finds herself in the same world as Kane, world number 89, where he was a hacker. This occurred after Kane destroyed the entire world and transformed it into his own constructed utopia. Built. In the dream, Surin regrets everything, but she finally obtains the sword that can cut through anything. Neither her master nor had overcome the weapon's resistance. They both later apologized for their previous behavior. Kale, already aware that Kane was the grandson of our overlord, nor anyone in that world could defeat her, but she never expected that a hacker would summon the digital realm. If only she had known earlier that Serena was the one who killed her teachers. He would have joined forces with her, and the outcome might have been different. Still, in the end, he decides to use the sword to cut through this digital world. At that moment, she wakes up with a start, realizing that it had all been a dream. Confused and disoriented, she finds herself in an unfamiliar room. As she begins to examine it, someone enters and asks if she's awake yet. Sauron, recognizing Kane's voice, realizes that it isn't him and asks who it is. The man introduces himself as the hacker and tells her not to worry, that this time it's not a dream. The hacker really rescued her from the place where she collapsed and left a note saying he would be taking her for a while. A flashback then reveals an android carrying Sauron, unconscious, while Serena and Kane were immobilized by a gravitational device. Returning to the present, Kane asked Serena if she had tried to track the android. Serena explained that he was disposed of in the outlaw sector without his recording device, leaving them without any leads or surveillance recordings. Kane suggested consulting with Uncle Y, adding that a cold trail in Outel could indicate a nearby base, and furthermore, that they needed to deliver a data chip. Serena looked like she was about to say something more, but when Kane pressed her, she dismissed it, saying it was nothing. Internally, Reinhardt asked him the reason for his visit, because Kane had brought a branch of mistletoe, so it must be something important. However, Kane himself didn't know the reason. Serena noticed his lack of curiosity about how she knew about Sauron, while she herself was dying to ask questions about Canebone Euclid and his apparent survival. Just then, his device indicated an incoming call from Serena. Surprised, she mentioned that she was just about to contact him and asked what he needed. He immediately asked if Serena was looking for Reyus's kidnapper, much to her surprise. He then revealed that the kidnapper was with him. The hacker addressed Serena directly, confirming that he was the one she was looking for. He stated that if she wanted to save Sin, whom he knew she regarded as a sister, she would have to comply with his demands. Serena, furious, ordered the hacker's capture, offering any price, but the hacker calmly informed her that it was already useless, since all of her superhuman enhancements had been neutralized. Serena was stunned when she realized that the hacker could controlling not only barriers, but also superhuman enhancements, and wondering where such a formidable individual came from. Serena then asked him if he was responsible for the death of the submaster of Torre Digil. When he confirmed it, she explained that was the reason she had called him. She wanted him to publicly announce that her organization was behind Digil's murder. Serena was horrified, realizing that such a statement from her part, being the master of the central machine tower with respect to the Eastern Submaster, would immediately unleash a full-scale war. Why was he there? His grandfather had simply told him to go there. By the way, the branch he was carrying was known as a divine treasure. Kane, hacker, indifferent to her concern about accelerating the conflict, pressured her to accept, assuring her that it was not a great loss and promising return Reyusin in 2 days if she accepted. After a moment of tense consideration, Serena reluctantly agreed. The hacker praised her wise decision. But the next thing we saw was Kane confronting the hacker. Serena, watching from the phone, immediately identified the retreating hacker as the kidnapper of Sauron and ordered Kane to arrest him. The hacker, seeing his plan for a silent retreat thwarted, simply commented that, apparently, he could not leave discreetly. Kane launched an attack, which the hacker dodged using an energy cannon. Kane, in turn, observed the hacker's technique and considered that subduing him might require the use of mana. The hacker quickly intervened, stating that his current form was merely an android, which didn't surprise Kane, given the advanced body modification. Internally, Kane noted the absence of any hacker energy emanating from the android. Kane wondered why the hacker was so upset if they had only destroyed a duplicate. The hacker explained that his anguish was because that android was his masterpiece. He asked Kane to let him go, suggesting it was also best for Reyusin. Kane seemed to give in, and the hacker, after thanking him, addressed Serena through the camera, who was watching, to remind her to keep her promise. Serena, a pawn. He didn't know that, but he was certain of one thing. His grandfather had probably stolen it. The branch hadn't reacted yet, which was why Kane hadn't noticed its importance. Observing, seemed surprised. The hacker's android retreated, whispering an enigmatic phrase to Kane, that they would meet again on the day. May the sun invigorate the world. As the android walked away, he asked Kane for an explanation. Kane, saying he would go after the hacker, left with Digil Khan's data chip, who warned him not to act rashly. Kane, however, recognized the hacker's parting words as a coded message that he had used in a past life on World 89, a signal for a secret meeting that meant, "Follow me, let's talk in private." Kane followed the hacker and soon arrived at the designated meeting place. The hacker greeted him, remarking that his swift arrival indicated that he still retained memories of his previous life. The hacker expressed his joy at seeing Kane Benuckled, whom he called the true master of his infinite power and knowledge, and stated that I had wanted to talk with him in a quiet setting for a long time. Kane observed the hacker's use of nanotechnology, a technique associated, mainly with witches, and noticed their mastery over it. When the hacker offered him tea, Kane refused, finding the strange chair offered to him sufficient. They offered him, and he directly asked the hacker what he wanted. At first, the hacker expressed a desire for friendship, but noticing Kane's impatience, he got straight to the point. He wanted to know how much Kane, the apostle of the apocalypse, knew about beings like them who had received their power. Meanwhile, in the central, it was surrounded by a faint aura. That branch of mistletoe was a material capable of being forged into a sword that rivaled a divine weapon. 20 years ago, Machine Tower, someone was already questioning Serena's decision to comply with the hacker's demands. Serena confirmed that she was almost finished preparing the documents and that he had ordered his secretary to pick them up. Remembering his previous desire to avoid a war, he insisted. Serena responded that war seemed inevitable now, and that the timing, as the hacker had pointed out, wasn't entirely unfavorable. However, argued that it could still be avoided, assassinating the master of the Eastern Mechanical Tower. Intrigued, Serena listened as he laid out a plan, assuring her that he could handle all the day preparations in 3 days, and that he himself would stop the war if it hadn't already begun by then. When Serena asked where those, quote, preparations would come from, he simply expressed his confidence in his success. He then suggested that they announce the hacker was the one who killed Digel. Serena, however, rejected that idea, immediately, refusing to put Saren in danger. Incredulous at what he saw as a ridiculous reason, reminded Serena of her responsibilities as master of the Central Tower and the continent's precarious situation. He warned her that obeying the hacker would make her his enemy. Serena, with a faint smile, simply replied, "Then so be it." Jack hung up, deeming her decision foolish. Noticing the increasing complexity of the situation, Serena summoned Marone, instructing him to publish the article according to the hacker's demands and to bring her a glass of cold water. First continent, he revealed that not only that land, but also the second, third, and even fourth continents would fall into ruin because of the boy who had asked Reinhard several times to allow him to forge a weapon using that branch, but he always refused. Now, Kane was the one asking him to create but it wasn't Marone. It was Kane who entered. Surprised, Serena asked if he wasn't pursuing the hacker and whether the culprit had escaped. Kane confirmed the hacker's escape and stated that he now needed a favor from him. Kane requested Serena's assistance in acquiring the key to access the Clevedon, deepest underground level of Metatron, specifically to gain entry into the third sanctuary of the sanctified ring vault. It was explained that Metatron, the Holy Land of Machinery, houses 11 such sanctuaries, each containing unique lost technology that is crucial for the advancements of the third continent. Access was restricted solely to the tower's masters and their assistants. Later, in Metatron's underground levels, Serena inquired whether the Supreme Lord had informed Kane about the lost technology and if he had also suggested a visit to the third sanctuary. The overlord she was referring to is Kane's grandfather. Kane confirmed this, explaining that, after recovering his mana, the Supreme Lord advised him to visit that location if he ever reached it, to the third continent. Serena then revealed a complication. The sanctified ring Kane was searching for had been stolen. This information was classified. Despite this, it led him to the entrance of the third sanctuary. And we have no idea where that ring is, right? When the biometric signal of Serena and the sanctuary was confirmed and began to unlock, an alarm sounded, detecting an unauthorized program. Serena was perplexed. Weapon with it. As he had demonstrated before, Kane could not use weapons made of metal for specific reasons. No matter how exceptional the sword, it would break before. Wondering who could have installed such a program within such a secure facility. The system reported that it was unable to resolve the problem. The program did not. Authorized and identified as secret code, the system was activated. Then, a voice familiar to Kane greeted him, remarking that it had been a long time. Kane recognized the voice as belonging to his grandfather. The secret code Alpha program confirmed Kane's presence, followed by secret code Beta, which confirmed Serena's presence. His grandfather's voice stated that he was sure they both had many questions, and that the secret code was a program that had been prepared precisely for that purpose. The voice then asked if they wished to connect to the secret code, instructing them to respond if they wanted to connect. Kane, although not fully understanding the situation, decided to proceed, trusting in the system prepared by his grandfather. Secret code Alpha then confirmed the connection and announced his entry into the Alpha Legacy world. Kane found himself in an unfamiliar location resembling the third continent. He wondered if they had. He was forcibly removed from the third sanctuary and wondered if Serena had been sent elsewhere, as he couldn't sense her presence. He decided to clarify these things upon his return to the sanctuary. As he moved through a crowd, an agitated man bumped into him, demanding he move and calling him a Class 1 citizen, which confused Kane. Class 1, which confused Kane. The man, identified by the system as Robert 3382, a Class 3 citizen, was flagged for, before he could even wield it properly. The reason is that, 10 years ago, after consuming a treasure from the deep sea, Kane became incapable of handling metals, iron, orichalcum, or unauthorized departure, and subjected to immediate trial, disintegrating before Kane's eyes. The system then announced the break time and registered him. Several other people, whose lives were ending that day, were thanked for their contributions to society as even more citizens were vaporized. Kane understood that he was in World 41, the same world his grandfather had experienced on the third continent, a world where everyone adhered to assigned roles, assigned with equal happiness, but where surveillance machines and AI controlled everything. He recognized this peaceful utopia called Metatron as a dystopia disguised as the paradise of a powerful nation. The secret code Alpha program informed him that after exploring the entire Alpha Legacy world, he must answer a question, the answer to which would determine his reward, before moving on to a second location. A disembodied voice whispered about technology, loss that would become the hope of that world. Meanwhile, Serena, still in the third sanctuary, confronted the Overlord, knowing that he was listening to her. She demanded that he stop acting with these machinations and speak to her directly. The Supreme Lord's voice then appeared, admitting that he knew he couldn't fool her. Serena asked him why he hadn't found her, and he acknowledged their long relationship. She reproached him for his broken promises to visit her first upon returning, to kill Kane personally, and his subsequent disappearance for 14 years while hiding with Kane. She demanded any other material, as anything he touched would be destroyed. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that almost all existing weapons are made of metal, which know his true intentions. A flashback showed 2 months before the destruction of World 99, Grandpa visiting Serena and asking her to build a device. Serena was surprised by his request, considering his aversion to machines, but she reviewed the plans and realized it was a device for transferring memories, or a time machine powered by his innate regression ability, capable of transporting another person along with him. He explained that the purpose was to prepare for the destruction of the next world, should the current one fail, and he asked her to avoid the final battle and instead focus solely on building it. Serena examined the flawless plans, marveling at their ingenuity and doubting that anyone other than herself could design something like that, and then asked about the creator. The Overlord revealed that this person no longer existed in his world, that it was lost technology, and admitted that the design was incomplete, and that it would take at least 3 more months. Serena, recognizing the way he spoke, realized that the creator was herself, from World 39. The Supreme Lord had memorized the designs of every Serena in different worlds, refining them each time, and now the end was near. This would be his last regression, and the device's only use of the device. He lamented that if it had been completed sooner, Sauron, and Serena could have returned together. After much deliberation, Reinhard, the Supreme Lord, had chosen Serena to accompany him. Back in the present, Serena questioned the Supreme Lord's purpose in stopping the destruction of the meant he could never truly possess a weapon of his own. Sen didn't know any of this, but decided to accept Kane's request nonetheless. Now that he understood why. So why? She asked. Are you letting the tyrant Kane live? The Supreme Lord responded that killing Kane would not change the future. Serena, skeptically, she inquired if he was truly certain that Kane wasn't the source of the destruction and if he might have been a puppet. The Supreme Lord affirmed his intuition, explaining that he chose to keep Kane nearby and conceal him to shield him from the true cause of the world's ruin. Then, he tasked Serena, with protecting Kane, as the true mastermind behind the disaster, was likely still searching for him. Serena reluctantly agreed, even though she still found it impossible to show compassion for the tyrant. The Supreme Lord considered that sufficient. Serena then inquired about the current location of the Overlord, who revealed he was in the demon realm searching for someone, but before he could finish speaking, the transmission abruptly cut off. Serena wondered if she was looking for the mastermind behind everything. Back in the Alpha Legacy world, Kane observed the controlled society and reflected that, although there was no absolute happiness or misery, people were born without rights, but also without the responsibilities that those rights implied. As the program concluded its presentation of the final world, it posed the question, do you think this world is a utopia or a dystopia? Kane pondered it. He didn't see freedom, but he also didn't see exceptional cruelty. Following the rules guaranteed a basic level of happiness, but living as just another cog in the machine. Reinhardt had sent him the branch. He realized that weapons made with Muertagon would not be affected by Kane's condition. Kane was surprised by, could be despairing for some. He concluded that, like any world, it wasn't simply one thing or the other. His response was, I don't know. They asked why, and he explained that it felt no different from any other ordinary world, a place that could be both paradise and hell. His response to them was, confirmed, and the program announced that it would now display a message from its creator, Reinhardt Bonyuk Kid. He then relayed a message to Kane, explaining that the world Kane had just experienced was a test of his moral compass. If Kane had followed Reinhardt's teachings, then he would have identified that world as a dystopia. Instead, succumbing to evil would have led him to perceive it as a utopia, which would have resulted in his destruction. Furthermore, he explained that answering I don't know signified that Kane had transcended simple obedience and had begun to think for himself. As Kane silently processed this, his grandfather continued, explaining that such a response indicated that Kane, previously lacking emotions, was beginning to develop his own thoughts and the capacity to worry. Confident in Kane's newfound autonomy, Reinhardt declared that he could now entrust him with something important, and Kane was enveloped in a brilliant light. Kane inquired about the nature of this gift, and his grandfather's voice revealed that it was the heart of the PP, evil dragon Benasaran, a creature of immense power, executed by its own kind because of its wickedness. Later, Kane finally returned to the third. The possibility of finally owning his own weapon had dwindled so much that he had almost given up hope. This felt like his grandfather's final gift to him. Then he exited the store and found Sanctuary. Kane noticed Serena's absence and that her cloaking ability was active. He perceived a calm flow of mana, deducing that the advance had not yet begun. Realizing he still had time, Kane took the dragon's heart, feeling its potent malice. He wondered if he could absorb its power without losing himself, but decided to try and began the absorption process. Meanwhile, in the tower, Central Mechanics, Serena expressed her concern for Kane. Her thoughts were interrupted by Brown's report that the East had declared war. War with a surprisingly quick response. Less than 2 hours after an unspecified announcement, Serena speculated that the East had anticipated their actions. Brown acknowledged how unexpected the death of the Vice Lord of the Digel Tower was, leading Serena to deduce that the hacker responsible for publicizing it had allied himself with the East, which explained their rapid mobilization. She questioned the hacker's motives for siding with them. Maran asked what their course of action should be, and Serena instructed him to follow the previously established war simulation manual. Just as Maran confirmed that he would begin preparations, he alerted Serena that the 4 mechanical towers, east, west, south, and north, were advancing on the central tower, having committed all their forces. Elsewhere, Surin, held captive by the hacker, commented on the start of the war, and the hacker surmised that Serena was likely panicking at that moment. Store and found Emi with 2 other men. They were all in a panic, so Kane inquired about what was going on. Before they could answer, he guessed, it's. The hacker coldly confirmed that he was the one who had orchestrated everything. When Sauron asked him about his goal to destroy the third continent and the reasons behind it, the hacker clarified that he desired peace. He viewed the other Tower Lords as villains, and their elimination through war would cleanse the continent, allowing the Central Tower Lords, under the influence of Serena, to expand their power, a strategy to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Sauron was surprised and asked if he genuinely wanted to help Serena gain power. The hacker affirmed that someone as dedicated to the continent as Serena deserved that power. However, he added enigmatically that this was the original plan, but it changed because Canebone Euclid appeared before him. The scene then shifted to the central tower 2 hours later, where Serena and Marin, they observed numerous airships approaching from the east, west, north, and even the south. Serena confirmed with Maron that he had brought the energy-devouring monsters, and he reported that all preparations were complete. Impressed by his efficiency, Serena prepared for the next step. Then, she received a call from the Lord of the East Tower, who tried to provoke her into surrendering. Serena dismissed his arrogance, and he issued one last warning. For her part, Serena defiantly asked him if he was planning to back down. Enraged by her response, the Lord of the East hinted that possible that Manager Din had disappeared. The man from before was Manager Din. Upon hearing this, they began to apologize profusely, believing that they had. His actions would be the answer. Serena calmly took note of his insolence while Maron reported that the 4 tower lords were charging their cannons. Mana. Serena ordered a counterattack aimed directly at the center. Her system confirmed that they were ready, and she ordered an attack on all the mechanical towers, while the counterattack at the enemy unleashed a barrage of fire, 231 Magitech cannons, 3 bursts of hellfire, and over 300 additional weapons. Serena, with cold precision, ordered her forces to destroy them all. She then commanded all the artillery gates to be opened, initiating a devastating counterattack that visibly surprised the Lords of the East Tower with its immense power. The Lord of the West Tower complained to the Lord of the East that the Central Tower's strength far exceeded what had been promised, pointing out that Serena hadn't even activated her system or the railgun, and expressed his fear of an imminent defeat. Irritated, the Lord of the East silenced him with a sigh. The Lord of the West brushed him off and requested to speak directly with the hacker. He told him that the hacker lacked authority and wasn't in charge, which confused the Lord of the West. The hacker then appeared on the call with the Lord of the East, feigning surprise. The Lord of the East accused him of deception, but the hacker explained that while that had been the initial plan, inaction would have led to defeat. He framed the crisis as an opportunity to showcase new technology, offering a demonstration in exchange for his participation, which allowed the employee who had mistreated the customer to escape. Kane, now understanding the reason for their excessive apologies, realized that they had mistaken him, would also serve to display the power of the Eastern Tower. After a moment of consideration, the Lord of the East reluctantly agreed. The hacker, after a polite, "excuse me," he began typing, announcing his new technology, EMP, or electromagnetic pulse. A wave of energy radiated outwards from the tower. East. Everyone watched in amazement as the enemy attacks stopped. The hacker smirked with satisfaction, declaring that the stage was now set for the arrival of Kane Bonasir. Stood before him, burdened with this bleak vision of the future, the old king confessed that he had attempted to end the boy's life on countless, for an expert hired from the 4th continent. Most of those experts had difficult personalities, so they probably thought he would be. They were killed, which upset Kane. To defuse the situation, he told them he was fine, and left without saying anything further. Later, Kane came across a group that was Kane Jazd, following him. Someone had placed a 3-ounce gold bounty on his head, and the group had come to kill him. After a short time, without even trying, Kane had killed everyone except for one. The last man, trembling with fear, confessed that the others had threatened to kill his family if he didn't cooperate. Kane had some questions and was willing to forgive him if he answered truthfully. He was even willing to swear on his sword, even though it wasn't his own. A sword oath, made by a swordsman, restricted the mana of whoever broke it. The more skilled the swordsman, the more severe the consequences would be. Kane quickly swore that if the man in front of him answered truthfully, he would not harm him. The question was simple: who sent you to kill me? The man did not respond immediately, but after a few taps with the sword, he finally spoke. It turned out that Manager Din had sent them, but the request actually came from a large organization based in the area. Manager Din had used his contacts to get those men to accept the job, meaning Manager Din was also part of a criminal organization, which explained occasions in a desperate attempt to change fate. However, no matter how hard he tried, altering what was predestined proved to be an impossible task. The dark aura that Kane could see around him. Kane asked him about the location of the organization's base, curious to know from where they were operating. These men, after receiving the information, he confirmed that the man was telling the truth. However, Kane had no intention of letting him go, because, to the sword oath, unfortunately it didn't apply to him. His grandfather had given him the immortal realm Peach, and after consuming it, his mana had disappeared. Since the restrictions of the oath were based on mana, they no longer had any effect on him. Kane had made a promise, but a promise made by a villain was worth nothing. With that, he killed him, and the sword finally disintegrated. The next scene takes us to the place where Lan was resting. From the outside, it seemed to be just a common accommodation, but that only applied to the exterior and the lobby. Through a hidden passage that led underground, one could find a meeting of the most dangerous criminals in the area. They hadn't even spared a child, whom they had enslaved. In a private room, Manager Din was visibly furious. He had just received news that the gang he had sent to assassinate Cain had been completely annihilated. Standing before him was a renowned expert from Atla. To clarify, Atla was a criminal organization, and he was a part of it. He figured his boss must have high expectations of him, considering they'd sent such an expert. However, he soon realized that Reinhard von Euclid had endured countless failures, witnessing the destruction of the world time and time again with his own eyes. He wasn't there to deal with Cain. The expert's mission was simply to retrieve certain information. Din didn't know many details, but he was related to the data that Ironheart had acquired. What he hadn't reported yet was the true reason he infiltrated Ironheart to steal that information. Upon hearing this, Din began to tremble, but the expert reassured him, saying that he hadn't received orders to kill him, so there was no reason to worry. He was just there to retrieve the information. After performing a memory review, the expert prepared to leave, which made Din panic. If he left, who would protect him? But then the expert stopped. He noticed the silence outside the room, a silence that only meant one thing: something was wrong. In fact, it was Cain who was asking the boy to keep his eyes closed a little longer. Seeing the expression of Soktadin's actions made the Atlas man wonder if he knew the boy. He commented that the boy was far too brutal for his age. Hirokin simply laughed, pointing out that someone who enjoys torturing others is the last person who should be talking about brutality. The man retorted that he should have shown compassion, but Cain rejected the idea outright. He stated that goodness is repaid with goodness, and evil with evil. Compassion was not for him. The only thing he could offer was infinite malice. With that, Cain delivered a perfect slash, cutting the man's neck so quickly that he didn't even see the blade coming. Now, Cain was satisfied with the outcome. Each time, desperation consumed him, making him more ruthless in his quest for power. But the day his grandson, Cain Benusid, was born, something shifted within him. Finally, he and Eladin were alone. Later, in Ironheart, Kay and Cain were discussing the data chip containing the report that Din had prepared for the mission. Atlas Group. The Chet was a storage medium invented on the third continent and required a compatible device to read. As it predated mass production, prior to mass production, it would be difficult to find a tablet that could read it, but the information stolen by Atlas was still there. They didn't know what it was. That was exactly what they were looking for, so they had to stay alert without knowing when they would have to act. Kale asked about the boy, noticing that he wasn't. He looked like Cain's son. Cain explained that he had saved him from the meeting place and asked Kale to take care of him, since they couldn't trust the forces of safety after what happened at Atla. Kale agreed to take care of the boy. Just as Cain was leaving, Kale showed him a scroll. It was about the box he had come in, the mistletoe branch. After investigating, Kale had discovered a secret compartment in the box, and this was what he found inside. He suspected it was Reinhardt's work, so Cain thanked him and asked him to contact him once he acquired a data chip reader before departing. The scene then shifts to the place where Cain had killed the man from Atla. A fox girl who had just arrived wondered who could possibly use force against someone from Atla. Nariel commented that even though they were allies, they were exceedingly brutal, so they couldn't be too happy about it. The fox girl acknowledged that it might be difficult. He clung to hope. Rising from his throne, Reinhardt approached the boy and declared that, from that moment forward, Cain would follow him, if destiny, to communicate with that person, but she felt a familiar sensation emanating from them. Nariel stated that at least it was good to know that there were others besides them who opposed Atla. Fox Girl agreed, believing that there might be others fighting to eradicate Atla, and in fact, she hoped to meet such a person. In the next scene, Cain is shown reading a letter from Reinhardt. Reinhardt had already predicted that Cain would travel to the central continent and meet with Kale, and that Cain would receive the mistletoe branch. He also knew that Cain would ask for a sword, and that he would encounter the Oracle, who could foresee destiny. Reinhardt knew so much, including that Cain would face Atla in Barakar. Everything had happened exactly as he had foreseen, but he also warned that Cain would lose his life at the hands of Atla. The scene then shifts to the Mechanical Paradise, a commercial district where only products from the advanced civilization were sold. The mechanics of the third continent. Cain was extremely tired because he was out of mana. Those who used mana didn't need much sleep, as the mana activated both body and mind, helping them recover from exhaustion. Kane entered a store and asked for a product from the TK series. The vendor was surprised, explaining that the item had been released 27 years ago, but directed him to a specific store, the only one that still had it in stock. Kane entered that store and, shortly after, Foxgirl and Ariel arrived, looking for someone. They explained that they were looking for tablet-type devices from the TK series, but the seller told them that he had already was inevitable. Then he would ensure that Kane was so strong that no fate could dictate his path. 10 years had passed since. Sold the last one to Kane. Wondering who could have bought it, they decided to track him down. To get more information, Foxgirl used her. She used her charm to try and seduce the seller, asking for details about the buyer. The scene then cuts to Kane inserting the chip into a device, which displayed personal information about the Ironheart blacksmiths. Just as he was about to leave to tell Kale about the information he obtained, the Foxgirl and Nariel found him. Upon seeing Nariel, Kane immediately understood that she was his bodyguard. The Foxgirl got close to his face and commented that he seemed more mysterious every time she saw him. Nariel reminded him to focus on urgent matters, and the Foxgirl directly asked Kane if he was a member of Atlas. Kane confirmed that he wasn't. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Suddenly, a group of people appeared, which seemed to confirm what Kane had said. Foxgirl, who was also a princess from the second continent, stepped forward, and Nariel immediately intervened to confront them. The newly arriving with a hostile attitude, they introduced themselves as important guests from the second continent and announced that they had brought the tablet, which implied that they were there to investigate them. Kane's TK device immediately began to vibrate. Upon removing the chip, they realized that these people were tracking them through the device and that it had been intentionally planted in that store. One of the group members inquired of. The protagonist embarked on his long journey with his grandfather, and he still clearly remembered each step of that intense path. In the present, Kane, whether he was with them or simply a stranger, Kane replied that he was the latter, and the individual decided to trust him, observing that he was not a man. Beast. Then, they pulled out a music player and an anti-beast weapon and started playing music at a high volume. The Foxgirl and Nariel both collapsed, fainted, but Kane remained unfazed. Thinking he was just a normal boy, they told him that they would take him to their base for interrogation, assuring him that they wouldn't hurt him. Then, one of them pulled out liquid metal handcuffs made from the strongest metal in the world. These handcuffs could suppress mana and other special abilities, and they cost more than an ordinary mansion. Later, Nariel woke up in a dark room and felt cold. She immediately panicked, desperate to know where the princess was. She soon realized that she was trapped with liquid metal handcuffs, and she knew that. She couldn't bring herself to break them. Kane, finding her in that state, explained the situation they were in and revealed that the princess had been taken. Nell hadn't noticed that Kane was also there. She asked if he was against Atla, and he confirmed that he was. He explained that they were after the person who had forged his sword, a unique weapon in the world, and he couldn't allow them to destroy it. That's why he planned to destroy them. Nariel looked horrified, believing that Kane had lost his mind, since not even the Beast King could break those handcuffs. But Kane didn't agree. Hands of one of 3 women. When this prophecy became known, the entire world turned against him, fearing what he would become. Many attempted to. Dangerous situation was unfolding. The feared Black Wolf ogre warrior, Makoro, had taken a woman, Reen, hostage, holding a blade against her neck. He said it was still just metal, and something like that couldn't hold him. Then he tore the handcuffs to pieces. He also freed Nariel by breaking her shackles. And then he tore off the iron bars, which only added to her trauma. I can't believe he's just a boy, Kane thought to himself. He guided her towards the source of the footsteps he had heard when the Foxgirl was taken away. In the next scene, the Foxgirl was chained up with the same handcuffs as before. One of the men was clearly enjoying watching her suffer and expressed his desire to tear her eyes out and just stare at them. The girl replied that it would be more fun if she were to tear out his eyes and play with them instead. The man, despite knowing he would get into trouble, decided to try and gouge out one of her eyes. Just when he approached her with a tool, he sensed a presence behind him. It was Kane, who delivered 2 powerful kicks that sent him flying. Then, Kane destroyed. He told Foxgirl's wives to leave with the bodyguards. He couldn't allow the priestess to see what was about to happen. Once outside, Nariel hugged Foxgirl, relieved, but horrible screams and howls began to be heard from inside the building. The sounds made them wonder what kind of interrogation was taking place. A while later, Kane came out and suggested they leave. The girls were curious about what had happened to the man, and Nariel decided to take a look. Cain warned her that she would regret it, and she did. Their demand was simple. If the three present wanted the woman to live, they had to hand over their possessions. The woman, terrified and desperate, begged. What she found was so atrocious that it could not be described. Then they arrived at the hideout of the Atlas scoundrels, and, as expected, it had been difficult to locate. Cain remarked that they were far enough away that no one would be able to find them. He wanted to discuss something important, and first, provided information about the device that had incapacitated both Ariel and the Fox Girl. The device negatively impacted the bloodstream of the Beastmen, causing them to collapse. Beastmen utilize a special technique that reinforces their bodies by infusing mana into their blood, but Cain admitted that even he didn't fully understand how it worked. The girls thanked him, but he changed the subject, revealing that he had discovered Atla's objective. Their goal was to bring about the collapse of the central continent. They were planning to destroy it and forcibly dismantle the treaties of peace between the four continents. Then, using their organization's influence on each continent, they planned to trigger intercontinental wars. Intercontinental wars. Once the continents had exhausted their military power, Atlas would rise as the ruler of the world. Cain then understood what his grandfather meant when he warned him that he would lose his life to Atlas. After that, he decided to act on his own. The girls insisted on staying with him, but Cain said that he had an urgent matter to attend to. This urgent matter was a possible invasion of Ironheart by Atlas, which required that, for her life, revealing that she had a baby waiting for her back home. The three hesitated, torn between giving in to the demand or trying to escape. Finally, one of them stepped forward. He returned immediately. The Fox Girl asked him if they could meet again, and Cain agreed to see her at 6 p.m. the next day, at the Sarah Tavern, located to the right of Block 3 inches, the central business district. No sooner had he left than Nariel began comparing him to the Beast King. Meanwhile, as the Fox Girl adorably drooled, thinking about how the only man whose fate she couldn't foresee had saved her life, she resolved to ask him his name the following day. Cain was then seen knocking on a house door, wondering if Kale was inside. Kale appeared looking similar to Santa Claus, but sporting a black beard. Cain told him that he had checked the data chip, and they went inside. Once inside, Kale was visibly worried about whatever Atla was planning. Cain suggested hiding out with the blacksmith, but Kale rejected the idea. If the enemy were to, he realized that even though they had discovered his plan, they would attack regardless. Even if they hid, they would be found. Furthermore, because Cain had already attacked their base, now they would be hunting him down desperately. Cain felt guilty for being reckless, but Kale reassured him, saying it was only the mistletoe branch that had thrown him off. He also told him not to worry about the sword. However, there was still a problem. Siren, a rare metal from the problem second continent, was essential to neutralize the unique properties of the mistletoe branch, and was very difficult to obtain. If Cain managed to find it, with his face burning with anger, he accused Makoro of dishonor, asking how a supposedly supreme warrior could stoop so low as to prey on a defenseless woman. Kale said he could finish the sword within a week. Cain believed that was possible. The next day, at Sarah's tavern, Cain asked the girl. Zoro said that he could obtain the metal as soon as possible. She responded that it might take some time. As he glanced at Nariel's sword, he asked Cain if the metal needed to be in its raw form. Cain responded that he did not care what state the metal was in. Suddenly, the Fox Girl exclaimed that they could get it immediately, and she cast a disturbing look at Nariel. Nariel refused to hand over her sword, saying that it was a gift from the Beast King. However, after receiving another veiled threat, she reluctantly handed it over to Cain. After thanking them, Cain offered to share information about the enemy base, and mentioned that he planned to tell them everything he knew. Suspicious, the Fox Girl asked him what he wanted in return. Cain responded. It was nothing important, he simply wanted to form an alliance. To confront Atla, he needed allies he could trust. Cain claimed he could tell if someone was trustworthy just by looking at them. According to him, the two of them passed the test, and they agreed to work together. Cain took the sword and, just before leaving to deliver it, the Fox Girl gave him a map of the place where they were staying. She also revealed her name, Seville Biston. Cain didn't think it was necessary to reveal his full name, so he simply said his name was Cain. In the next scene, we see Cain, like Reen, but Makoro simply scoffed, tightening his grip on the knife even further. The woman's life depended solely on their decision. Just then, Cain appeared, walking after having delivered the sword to Kale. Now, in just 1 week, his weapon would be ready. indestructible, no matter how strongly he used it. After all, it was a divine weapon. He arrived at the beastmen's lodgings and knocked on the door, reciting a code phrase. The lamb was sold out. Nariel opened the door. Inside, the room was crowded with people. As he entered, Cain wondered why Shopathan had appeared with the suppression squad. He decided to get to the bottom of things. Shopathan, seeing Cain approaching, panicked. Moments later, Cain decapitated him, leaving everyone in shock. Only after that did he introduce himself. Immediately, chaos erupted. Everyone began to attack him, including a girl who lunged at him. But Cain did not allow himself to be defeated. He made sure not to injure anyone else during the confrontation. While Nariel watched from the sidelines, waiting for things to clear up, the misunderstanding unfolded. Another man attempted to attack him, but Cain intervened, explaining that Shahan was a spy. The group remained skeptical, finding it difficult to believe. To support his claim, Cain mentioned the Jepril School, a research institute specializing in body magic. He explained that among their techniques, there existed a body transformation magic. This magic involved implanting a special stone created by the school, allowing a person to replicate the structure, face, and even 10% of another person's unique mana signature. When Cain broke the magic stone, the man's original form returned. Everyone, out of nowhere, his gaze fixed intently on Makoro. After confirming Makoro's identity, Cain declared that Makoro had been consumed by evil, leaving him no other option. Fell silent, astonished. Cain had spoken the truth, but two questions immediately arose. First, how had he recognized him, being a swordsman, a technique from the Yil school? And second, why hadn't he mentioned the man was a spy before killing him? The first answer. It was simple. Cain had mastered the 7 magical schools that existed on the first continent. The second was more complex. He explained that it was a reaction. Obsessive-compulsive, something beyond his control. His grandfather had taught him never to hesitate when facing evil, and to trust his instincts. As a result, whenever he sensed something evil, his body would usually move on its own before his mind could react. However, Nariel, he pointed out that, even so, he needed to explain himself before acting. Cain apologized, and admitted that he would try to control himself better on future missions. With that settled, the topic shifted to the princess, who was on the top floor praying beneath the full moon. Suddenly, Nariel realized something. If a spy had managed to infiltrate the building, there was a high probability that someone was also targeting the princess. Alarmed, she rushed upstairs. Upon opening the door, she felt relieved to see that the princess was safe and unharmed, but then it was revealed that the princess had, in fact, been attacked. However, she eliminated the intruders with ease. In her current state, defeating her was nearly impossible. Seeing Nariel at her door, the princess assumed that the lower, rather than eliminate it, he didn't hesitate and launched a precise strike, severing the ogre's head in one fell swoop. However, in doing so, he also killed the woman Makoro was holding. Floors had also been attacked, although that wasn't exactly the case. Nariel then explained everything to her. Suddenly, the princess mentioned that he had just detected another person inside the tower, someone who had completely concealed their presence. Without waiting for Nariel's response, he ran towards the lower floor. The reason for his urgency was that the one hiding so stealthily was none other than Cain. According to Ariel, under the full moon, the princess's power could rival that of the Beast King in his prime. He was worried that even Cain might not be able to face her if he was unprepared. The princess soon located Cain and even launched a kick at him, but Cain calmly blocked it, as if he were swatting aside a balloon. Realizing her mistake, the princess immediately began to apologize, assuming that Cain was an intruder. Meanwhile, Nariel was left utterly speechless. Open. He had just witnessed Cain struggling to stop an attack that even the Beast King wouldn't have been able to block so easily. That stirred up a disturbing question in his mind. Could it be that Cain was even more powerful than the Beast King? Later, Nariel and Cain informed the princess that they had discovered a spy in their midst. They suspected that the Jepril school's transformation magic might be the reason why the Ocherwai princess hadn't been able to foresee that man's fate. As many knew, the princess possessed the ability to see the destinies of people as long as they held. The 3 witnesses were astonished and incensed by what they perceived as a crime. They attacked Cain, denouncing him for murdering and were within her field of vision, without any additional conditions required. In short, the power of destiny was directly linked to the unique mana of each individual. Even if someone attempted to suppress or conceal their mana, their destiny remained visible. Anyone who possessed mana could not escape his gaze. Nariel reprimanded the princess for so casually revealing such sensitive information, but it was clear that the princess had no intention of stopping. So Nariel turned to Cain and requested that he not share what he had just overheard with anyone outside their group. Suddenly, Cain sensed something and stood up. The princess and Nariel were confused, having no idea what he was reacting to. Then Cain revealed that they were surrounded, even though they weren't actually surrounded yet. Approximately 1.5 kilometers from the inn, 3 members of Atlas were approaching. They were the ones responsible for dispatching the previous spy. He was Rus, the sacred sword of Genesis, an Atlas executive, and ranked number 12. After a tense conversation, 2 of them, they began arguing about the spy's lack of information. Their fight escalated until Rus calmed them down, but just as they were preparing to launch their assassination attempt, one of the members noticed something terrifying. Their leader had just been killed with a single blow. Turning around, he saw that his other companion also lay dead. When the last Atlas agent turned around, he was stunned to see Cain right in front of him. In a panic, he launched an attack. Innocent person. Cain immediately retaliated, swiftly taking down one of them. However, when the other 2 attacked him, he merely deflected their attacks, hoping to defend himself, but he was no match for Cain. Like his companions, he was quickly eliminated. After the battle, Cain picked up the Rus's sword. It looked like a high-quality weapon, and he estimated that it might last him about 3 days, give or take. Back at the inn, Nariel was already feeling restless. He concluded that their base had been compromised and suggested abandoning it. He gave instructions to get rid of anything that could reveal sensitive information, and to take only the essentials when relocating. When Cain returned, the group asked him if he had managed to scout the enemy positions and identify their commander. They assumed that Cain had gone ahead to gather information for the upcoming battle, and they were preparing for a fight. Important. Cain calmly responded that they shouldn't worry. He had already taken care of the attackers. In fact, he had eliminated them all in just 3 minutes. His words weren't immediately understood, but when they saw the sword he brought as spoils, reality hit them hard. That sword belonged to none other than Rus, the sacred swordmaster, and a high-ranking executive of Atla. Its name was Rashi Bortan, an enchanted blade said to be capable of cutting through anything. Without hesitation, Cain had killed everyone who stood in his way. Without killing them. Baffled, they demanded an explanation. Cain calmly revealed that both the woman and the ogre were, in fact, accomplices. Although initially, the princess, who had been praying until that moment, suddenly stood up, revealing her true form. An Atlas executive, ranked 8th, received news of Rus's defeat. Ban, a powerful figure, hadn't anticipated such an outcome. However, he had also heard rumors that the princess possessed blood even more potent than that of the Beast King. It was possible that she had awakened her power and was the one who defeated Rus. Originally, the princess was the target, but Rus's defeat had disrupted their plans. Ban decided to leave everything in the hands of the woman before him, wanting to focus on his own work. However, what exactly he was doing remained a mystery. The next day, Cain found himself on the outskirts of Barakal, at a ruin located within the forest. He was alone because the day before, everyone had decided, separate and meet again at the agreed-upon location. Arriving 2 hours before the scheduled time, Cain chose to spend the time in self-reflection. Self-reflection, a practice of observation without subjectivity, was intended to align his essence with the truth. He was doing it to find an answer to a question his grandfather had asked him long ago. Which comes first, the body that follows the mind, or the mind that follows the body? He was to end his life before he had a chance to grow up, but one man stood against them all, his grandfather, the founding king. Refusing to accept they didn't believe him, Cain urged them to examine the bodies, assuring them that members of the Black Wolf group always carried identification. Following close to discovering the answer. Meanwhile, the princess and Ariel were traveling when the princess, exhausted after having woken up twice in a single day, perceived what really shocked her was the dark and malevolent mana emanating from him. After consuming the immortal realm peach, Cain had lost the ability to use mana. However, every time he delved into self-reflection, his mana would temporarily return. He still didn't understand whether this return was a result of practice or simply a momentary recovery. He would notice. When he approached them, the princess was startled, but she quickly reassured him that nothing was wrong and that she was just thinking. Minutes later, everyone had arrived. In reality, they were late, and it was all Cain's fault. His mana had expanded, transforming the forest into a labyrinth. Minutes later, everyone had arrived. In reality, they arrived late, and it was all Cain's fault. His mana had expanded, transforming the forest into a labyrinth. The mana felt like a part of nature itself. Without wasting any more time, the group got to work. The princess continued to wonder about what she had seen before, and whether that dark mana really belonged to Cain. However, she trusted him and decided not to dwell on it further. They planned to leave the area soon, as the royal airship would arrive in 4 days, so for now, they needed to move forward. The supply officer, the communications officer, scout, and the person in charge of the magical alarm device were all present. Thanks to the scout and the magical alarm device, they knew. The council inspected the corpses and, to their surprise, discovered that Cain was telling the truth. Convinced, only one question remained: how did he know? That Atlas had begun to move. Luckily, they were not heading towards them, but were instead causing trouble in the capital's commercial district. The real problem was in Ironheart, where Cole and Amy were in serious trouble. Atla wanted to sign a contract with Cole and was blackmailing him to do so. If he refused, outside Ironheart, members of the supposed Central Continent Self-Defense Group were preventing customers from entering, claiming it was a holiday because of an unresolved issue at the forge. But what no one knew was that these so-called defenders were actually agents of Atla, who had spent years building a false reputation. One of the men warned the other not to talk about the matter, as they would be in serious trouble if anyone overheard them. Suddenly, Cain appeared and swiftly killed one of the men. He thanked them for the information, revealing that he had been listening the entire time. At first, they attacked him, but when they realized, since they were no match for him, they began to flee, calling for help. It was all in vain, as those outside could neither see nor hear them. This was due to the princess's barrier, Princess, which had later been modified to become a formal one that completely isolated the inside from the outside. The barrier would only last 2 minutes, but that was enough time. The group had already decided what the princess's role would be: to be the vanguard, using her absolute power to defeat. With a firm expression, Cain responded simply, "I only eliminate evil." The scene then shifts to a crowded tavern, where Reinhardt praises Cain for the enemy on the night of the full moon. On the other days, she would support the group with her barrier formation. By having the power of the priestess or the princess, Khan's options were expanding, while M's situation had worsened. After counting to 5, the men demanded that C sign the contract with the bond he had agreed to, yet they still threw Amy into the fire. However, when they turned around, they discovered that the person shouting and burning was not Amy, but an Atla member who had thrown her into the fire. How could this be? Because Cain was already there. He appeared calmly behind the Atla member, explaining that burning to death was the most painful way to die. Each breath dissolved the lungs as the flames engulfed the body, and every nerve cell simulated pain in a constant attempt to resist the fire. This extreme agony also made it was difficult to lose consciousness. By the way, Cain also threw the other member of Atla into the fire. He managed to save everyone just in the nick of time, but the look on his face, Amy had been severely injured. They considered using ice to help, but Cain stopped them, explaining that it would only make things worse in the long run. With an expression filled with murderous intent, he quickly summoned the princess. When she arrived, Cain asked her to heal Amy. In a matter of seconds, Amy's face returned to its original state. Ko was amazed, as she had never seen a healer with such incredible power. She commented that it was not surprising, considering she was Cain's ally, eradicating evil and saving the innocent. Still, a doubt lingers in his mind. How did he know that the woman and the warrior were accomplices? With 3 minutes still remaining on the barrier, they decided to abandon Ironheart immediately. Cain told his team that they needed to leave without any delay. Although they were worried about the warehouse supplies, but weapons could be replaced. Survival was the priority. Cain raised his hand, asking them to wait a moment. He then turned to the princess and asked her to extend the duration of the formation, which she managed to extend by 5 minutes more, which was more than enough. The real problem, however, was how to transport all the weapons, of which there were over 1,000. Cain reached his hand into his pocket and pulled out a small box. The princess, curious, leaned in to inspect it. Just before she could touch it, Cain warned her not to, but it was already too late. The box suddenly transformed into a large chest with an open mouth, appearing ready to devour her. However, Cain quickly stopped him, explaining that it was a labyrinthine mystery born from the seed of greed, a living treasure chest. This chest, it would be used to store all the weapons. Sometime later, a group of Atla members arrived at the warehouse, only to discover that all the weapons had disappeared without a trace. Frustrated, they decided to capture the families and relatives of the blacksmiths and shop employees, willing to do whatever it took to catch them. Meanwhile, Nariel, knowing that Atlas would surely go after the relatives of the blacksmiths, had already evacuated the families and acquaintances of those involved. He wonders what would have happened if the queen had actually been an innocent person. Then, Cain takes out a pendant that his grandfather had given him 4 years prior. That a royal airship would arrive in 4 days to take them away. They invited Cole and the others to the second continent, and they accepted the invitation. Before leaving, Cole asked for a favor. He needed a place to work because he wanted to finish forging Cain's sword, which was made from mistletoe wood. He believed he could complete it in 4 days and had already given it a name, Mlame. Later, Nariel and the princess took him to an abandoned factory, the only place they could offer him to work. Changing the subject, the princess asked Nariel if he had managed to establish contact with his country. Nariel responded that he had not yet been successful. It had been difficult to avoid the other communication terminals while trying to connect directly with the princess's brother. However, once they allowed their signal to be detected by the other terminals, they would be able to make contact. Immediate action was needed. The problem was that they couldn't take that risk just yet, because they didn't know which of the 13 terminals might be under the control of a spy. Of Atlas. Yes, there could be a spy among the 13 terminals. These terminals were operated by 13 people, all prominent figures in the country. In addition to the first terminal, there were 7 guardian knights, 2 of the most powerful warriors, and 3 high-ranking officials. All of them had served the royal family for more than 20 years. The only person who knew that the princess's unique mana was the key to her power was her brother, the first prince. No matter how much, Object revealed the truth. Those people were evil. It was the Ring of Holiness, a divine artifact originating from the third continent. It is revealed that, how long it took, they would only contact someone confirmed not to be a spy, the one person everyone trusted implicitly, the first prince. Respected. Later, they changed the subject, and the princess wondered aloud about Cain's whereabouts. They were truly surprised that he not only possessed artifacts, mimic-type and grade X-type artifacts, but was also incredibly powerful. They were unsure of his origins but felt confident that he wasn't aligned with the enemy. The princess found it hard to believe he could be a villain. Still, she couldn't ignore the dark mana she had sensed within him at that moment. 4 days later, Cain and Nariel were conversing. Cain praised her for her diligent work during those past few days. It was time to set out on their march. Everyone was ready. The princess remarked that it would have been better if Cain had accompanied them, but he assured her that he would return as soon as possible. Nariel, he said that they needed to return quickly because if they were delayed, Cain would have to handle everything by himself, which would be far too troublesome for him. Decided to wait for his return. As for the sword, it was already completed, but Cale requested that Cain not touch it for a while. Cain understood, and he expressed his gratitude, acknowledging that his dream had only come true thanks to him. Sometime later, the royal airship from the second continent finally arrived. However, along with the airship, people from Atla arrived as well. It appeared that his information had somehow been leaked. Initially, Atla only, even though Reinhardt had once ordered Cain to never commit any wrongdoing, he himself had stolen the ring, but there was no other choice. Was after the princess. But now they had discovered that he was also responsible for evacuating the artisans from Ironheart. The forces of Atla arrived fully prepared, taking out anti-beast weapons, which looked like simple loudspeakers, but actually functioned as devices that suppressed blood circulation. However, this time, they already knew how to counter them. They just needed to stop using the blood circulation technique. For the Atla forces, the situation became more of a nuisance than anything else, especially since they were initially told that using the suppression device would be enough to neutralize the princess. Now, they realized they had to face much more than they anticipated. Everyone was ready to fight, but the princess had other plans. She ordered the others to retreat, saying that she had a way to buy some time. Their formation was unaffected by the device suppressor, so he quickly erected a protective formation called Genbu. With this in place, no member of Atla could set foot inside. Meanwhile, Cain was in the abandoned factory, gazing at the sword that Cale had asked him not to touch. He couldn't wait a whole month without doing anything. And he also had Black Fawn with him, which he had borrowed from Nariel. He knew he couldn't keep her for much longer if he didn't act immediately. Who knew if he would arrive in time, but he couldn't just leave the sword alone either. At the sight of the conflict, the people of Atlan were left waiting. There was no way to alter Cain's destiny. That also led him to steal the second continent's treasure, the heavenly peach from the immortal realm. And, outside, unsure whether to give up or advance, everyone else had already boarded the airship, except for the princess and Nariel. Nariel called out to the princess, asking her to go up with them. However, the princess replied that she could not maintain the formation from afar, and if she moved from that spot, the formation would break. Nariel offered to buy time so that the princess and the airship could escape. But the princess, invoking the order of authority she had sworn never to use, ever employ, ordered Nariel to escape, no matter the method. The order of authority was an absolute command that could not be disobeyed. When Nariel became the royal guardian of the beast, she swore a blood oath to obey only one such order in her entire life, and so she obeyed and escaped, with the airship leaving the princess behind. The princess had already reached her limit and soon lost consciousness. Before Atla could do anything else, Cain appeared just in time, swiftly killing the captain and then eliminating the rest of the group, as he was convinced that they did not deserve to live. He decided to take the princess to a safe place so she could rest and receive the necessary treatment. Meanwhile, Ban, the number 8 executive of Atla, was furious after learning that they had failed to capture the princess. He gave the girl in front of him a chance to explain what happened. She desperately recounted that a powerful warrior had appeared out of nowhere and saved the princess. To confirm the details, the sacred artifact of the deep sea, all robberies in Avaros, the Ring of Holiness distinguished good from evil for Cain, and thanks to its guidance, he eliminated 3. The details? His team had brought a mana recorder, but curiously, it had not recorded even a trace of that warrior's mana. Despite being a high-end device, Van knew very well that only 3 individuals were capable of avoiding detection by such a device. The first was the Sword Saint of the 4th continent, the second, Reinhardt, the original king of the 1st continent. The last was the mysterious leader of the Atla organization, Van. He quickly came to a conclusion. There was a possibility that Reinhardt himself had infiltrated and appeared on the scene. If that were true, it would mean disaster for them. When the princess regained consciousness, she found herself in an unknown place and realized that she was confined by those people. A deep sadness washed over her as she thought of Ariel, wondering what would happen to her once the order was rescinded, and she was confined by those people. A deep sadness washed over her as she thought of Ariel, wondering what would happen to her once the order was rescinded, and she would return to her country. She was in an incredibly difficult situation, and tears began to flow as the weight of everything crashed down on her. It was then that, during that anguish, she heard Cain's voice. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, but as his presence became clearer, and he gently touched her, gently touching her forehead to check if she was okay, she realized that he was real. She cried again, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Cain, misinterpreting her tears, he thought she had physical injuries and quickly offered her an elixir. This particular elixir was extremely rare. Figures dressed in black. The ring had recognized him. Reinhardt claimed that Cain's celestial killing star had broken the chains of destiny. It was said to have the power to bring back life, even to the dead. As soon as the princess was exposed to its radiant energy, her pain began to disappear. Cain had been warned by his grandfather that a trial would soon befall the priestess, someone who could see the threads of destiny, and he advised him to make sure she drank that elixir when the time came. Despite the elixir's comforting effects, the princess refused to accept it, unable to bring herself to drink it. Cain, sensing her refusal, did not insist. As for Cain's sword, the one Kale had asked him not to touch, he had taken it with him, although he remained unsure of its condition. He wondered if the sword was maturing inside Mimic. Elsewhere, aboard the royal airship, really, Kale blamed himself for everything that had gone wrong. In his mind, if the sword hadn't needed to mature, Cain wouldn't have had to stay in the Mondstadt factory and could have saved the princess. What they didn't know was that she had already been rescued. Let me explain what the maturation of a sword entails. During this process, a sword absorbs mana, and the more mana it absorbs, the more powerful it becomes. If there existed a place where the mana was 5 times more concentrated, Cain's sword would evolve into a divine weapon. Unfortunately, he threw it inside Mimic, which had mana concentrations 10 times greater than normal. The sword began to glow intensely within the Mimic, and when Cain realized that the maturation process, cruel fate imposed on his grandson, the king undertook a desperate crusade. Using forbidden magic, he confronted the future Cain across countless, predetermined, and added that it was a horrible fate to have to go so far just to be able to remain on neutral ground. Cain looked at him, perplexed, was accelerating rapidly. He decided it was time to move, as he would soon have the sword in his possession. The princess had no idea where they were headed. Cain then explained that it was the perfect opportunity to attack Atla's central bay and that it could be done almost immediately. He knew that if the executive had been present during the airship attack, he would have intervened. This meant he was likely on a separate mission, far from the central continent. Kane asked the princess to cooperate with him, explaining that he needed her assistance, to which she readily agreed. The next scene takes us to Atlas' surveillance base, located on the outskirts of Barakal, where the entire staff was in a state of panic, desperately trying to find the princess at all costs. If they failed to locate her within 3 days, they would all be executed. In the meantime, Kane and the princess had already infiltrated. The base utilized perception suppression techniques to block the cameras. It was incredibly convenient, as Kane didn't have to fight anyone in the area. Unfortunately, their stealth didn't last long, and they were eventually discovered, but it wasn't a big deal for Kane, who eliminated them instantly. The captain of the base arrived shortly after hearing the commotion. Just as Kane was about to kill him with a single punch, the princess stopped him. They needed a password to access the system, and they could use that man to obtain it. The princess cast a spell on him. Although the details of the magic weren't clear, it worked. Even after 13 years together, he still didn't fully understand his grandfather's theories regarding destiny. Interrupting his thoughts, Reinhardt warned him, "Clear the details of the magic." It worked. The man began to answer everything they asked him. With access to the system, they began to review the reports detailed the invasion of the various continents. The information was presented in percentages. For the first continent, it was 99%. Kane was from the first continent. And who would have imagined that the unified kingdom his grandfather established would fall in only 14 years? What his father was doing now was a complete mystery. Kane was furious and overwhelmed with emotion, but then he apologized to the princess. As for the other continents, the situation wasn't much better. The third continent had an 11% invasion rate, the fourth 48%, and the second 38%. Fortunately, the Bistam royal family seemed to be holding out, suggesting that the princess's brother wasn't a traitor. The real problem, however, the problem was a lack of trust. Only 3 people knew about the return operation: the princess, Nariel, and her brother. The princess believed that the misunderstanding had been cleared up, but it wasn't that simple. Nariel was unaware of the full situation, and if he were to become convinced that the first prince was a traitor, no one could predict what might happen. The princess knew she had to inform her father immediately, as any delay could sow seeds of distrust within the royal family. Atlas would undoubtedly exploit that, potentially leading to the downfall of the second continent. But there was a problem. That he shouldn't delve too deeply into them, or he would suffer for the rest of his life. He also commented that, despite being his grandson, Kane had developed a body, had no way to communicate with their father. Suddenly, Kane suggested that they head to Atlas headquarters in Barakal, which was also their most accessible base, large, with over 1,000 members. Why? Their plan was to infiltrate their ranks and secure a communication device before Nariel arrived. To the second continent, time was running out, with only 8 hours remaining before the airship reached its destination. Meanwhile, at Atlas headquarters, chaos erupted as everyone mobilized to find the princess. The commander demanded that she be located as soon as possible, but a group requested more time. According to the commander, that was impossible because a particular individual was heading towards the central continent. Then another group from Atla arrived, the team that was supposed to be guarding the post. They explained that the commander himself had informed them of the arrival of invaders prompted Kane to order everyone to immediately head to the basement. This was all part of Kane's plan. He was the mastermind behind everything, convinced that if he gathered everyone in one place, he could eliminate them once and for all, in one fell swoop. When he entered the basement, the door slammed shut behind him, and the power was cut. It was the princess who had cut off the power. She also activated the sensory enhancement talisman that she had given to Kane, allowing him to see in the darkness. One by one, Kane began to slaughter everyone. On the other side, the princess watched, but all she saw was an evil being, someone who, similar to that of a beast. Kane was left wondering whether that was a compliment or not, but Reinhardt simply laughed and told him that it depended on how he wanted. Reveled in killing. Her suspicions intensified. She recalled the time she had witnessed the dark energy residing within Kane. Was this his true destiny? Everything now pointed, because Kane was evil. Kane had eliminated most of the group, leaving only 3 people in hiding. He provoked them by promising to forgive anyone who apologized. They all came out at the same time begging for forgiveness, which left Kane with no choice but to kill them. It was over, with almost everyone. And it was even more impressive because he had to rely solely on his hearing throughout the entire fight. The princess had given him a talisman to improve his vision in the dark, but it didn't work at all. When Kane emerged from the basement, he was surprised to find the princess waiting for him outside. He had told her to leave, but the princess didn't waste any time beating around the bush. She asked him directly if he enjoyed killing people, as everything he had witnessed previously indicated. Kane attempted to deny it, but before he could utter another word, Ban, the 8th in rank, appeared. Atlas Executive. Without any hesitation, Ban attacked Kane using his lightning attribute. His plan was to eliminate Kane first and then capture the princess, but Kane wasn't going to fall so easily. How audacious of Ban, believing he could defeat the protagonist with merely a lightning attack. When the smoke from the explosion dissipated, they discovered that Kane was completely unharmed. He quickly launched a counterattack, punching Ban and pushing him against the wall. This gave Kane to take it. That very night, Kane heard someone calling his name. Kane Benuclid turned to his grandfather and replied, "Yes," Reinhardt told him to. Moment to fully capitalize on the advantage. Kane handed the princess the soul of the mimic's Eratine Fubistrito. It was an object, sacred treasure of the first Beast King. Why did Kane possess it? His grandfather had stolen it from the Beast King in order to purify Kane's true nature, but he had also told him that one day he needed to return it to the princess. That sacred object held the power to awaken the dormant blood of the Prost, Vistrin. The priestess who wore it would undoubtedly become the most powerful Vistrin to ever live. Kane told him that he would explain the details later, but for now, he had to accept the item and safeguard it for later, as he would likely be unconscious after defeating Ban. He asked him to get away from there, because Ban had just gotten back on his feet. Ban launched another lightning attack at Kane, but Kane blocked it with a broken sword. Initially, Kane had thought that being in 8th place would be something important, but now Ban didn't seem so impressive. Kane caught the blow from Ban's lightning strike with his bare hands, surprising Ban. With his final blow, Kane easily defeated Ban. Meanwhile, the princess was already in the control room, still undecided about whether it was correct to use the divine artifact. Control room, still undecided about whether it was correct to use the divine artifact. However, she had no time to hesitate, as she heard footsteps approaching. The people of Atla had noticed that the security system was still offline, and they believed there was an intruder in the control room. Without a second thought, the princess lived freely, that nothing bound him any longer. Kane responded that he would live in freedom, but by following his grandfather's teachings, reward good with. She decided to use the artifact. Her father had told her that the first Beast King's divine artifact was both a blessing and a curse. Why was that? Let me explain. If the chosen one wielded the artifact, they would receive a great blessing, but if the person was not the chosen one, it would cost them their life. It was a life or death situation, albeit a doubtful one. The princess remembered Kane and finally relented. She activated the divine artifact, and of course, she did not die. She had worked tirelessly out of devotion, sacrificed her body, and sworn loyalty, for which she received the blessing. After using the divine artifact, the princess could see everything clearly. She noticed that, just as Kane had said, he lost consciousness after defeating Thunder Emperor Dan. However, there were still people heading towards the control room, so she had to deal with them first, and then take Kane to a safe place. When the people from Atla entered the control room, only to find it empty. Hiding her presence and remaining invisible, the princess took down 2 of them. There were only 10 remaining. In the following sequence, Kane found himself facing an army on the battlefield, with a wall separating him from his opponent, his future self. He was trying to confront the princess, who was destined to become the 37th Beast Queen. After an intense battle, the princess defeated and killed him. Kane believed that this was his destined future. Later, the princess managed to save Kane, bringing him to a safe location. He still had not good, and to return evil with endless evil. Hearing that, Reinhardt felt truly at peace. A wave of relief washed over him. The next morning, woken up, and they only had 4 hours remaining before Nariel reached the 2nd continent. According to the princess, the communication device that she found, the Atla base was also broken, possibly intentionally, to prevent anyone from communicating with others. Leaving those thoughts aside, on the other hand, she decided to get some fresh air. The princess felt her awakened power stirring within her, thinking it was due to the full moon. But soon, she realized that wasn't the case. It was the divine artifact that had triggered the awakening, allowing her blood to activate even without the full moon. She confirmed this after looking at herself in a pocket mirror. Her happiness didn't last long, however, because someone else arrived, the rank 1 executive of Abalta. known as Starfish, was there because he had heard that Thunder Emperor Van had just died. He learned that Reinhard Bonukid was the responsible for the death of Van Estrella de Mar. He demanded the princess tell him where Reinhard was, but she had no idea what he was talking about. Only 3 people could kill the Thunder Emperor in such a ruthless way: the head of his organization, the sword master of the 4th continent, and Reinhard Bonuclid, the supreme ruler of the 1st continent. At that moment, the only one whose location Estrella de Mar didn't know was Reinhard. Estrella de Mar was certain of his assumption, but the princess tried to explain that he was simply misunderstanding the situation. However, he believed that she was. Next, Cain found a letter from his grandfather. It read, "Although it may seem sudden, our journey ends today. Walk your own path, free from working with Reinhard." He also noticed that she was trying to protect the cave behind her, so he figured Reinhard must be hiding inside. Throwing the princess aside, Starfish pointed a steel spear towards the cave. The princess tried to intervene, determined to protect Cain, who was unconscious inside. Unfortunately, Starfish managed to throw the spear, and it almost hit her. She barely managed to dodge the attack thanks to her divine artifact. Starfish, uninterested in the princess, threw the spear into the cave. The force of the spear destroyed the entire cave, but there was no reaction from within. The reason is that someone capable of defeating the Thunder Emperor wouldn't die so easily. On the other hand, the princess was furious. She couldn't believe that she hadn't been able to protect Cain, who had entrusted her with his life. She was ready to kill this some kind of starfish, or whatever it was called, but it wasn't making things easy for him. It began launching multiple spears at her, and dodging them was taking every ounce of his strength. Effort. Just when the situation seemed to be getting even worse, they heard Cain's voice coming from the rocks. Cain had just woken up and was in a bad mood, frustrated by the long nightmare he had just endured. He needed something on which to unleash his anger. Estrella de Mar instantly recognized him as the son of Reinhardt and was shocked. According to the rest of the world, Cain should have been dead. The priestess had announced Cain's death at the hands of his grandfather Reinhardt. Ties of destiny. And finally, there is something I must tell you, Cain. No matter what others may say, you are not a villain. The scene changes and Bonaclid, but here Cain was, alive and standing right in front of him. This meant that Reinhardt had lied to everyone in order to protect Cain. The desire for revenge, the starfish grew larger. He was now determined to present Cain's head to Reinhardt as his ultimate act of revenge. The princess wanted to help Cain, but, remembering their previous fight, she realized she would only be a burden, so she decided to wait for his return, telling him that she would be there when he returned. Starfish was confident he would win, and launched another barrage of spears at Cain. However, Cain tried to defend himself by cutting down the spears with his sword. To his surprise, the sword melted instantly, and he was struck by a spear. Starfish's ability, Metal Massacre, allowed him to destroy any metal and absorb it as his own power. It could even affect the metal within Cain's blood, making the situation even more dangerous. This power was extremely rare, and Starfish had obtained it for the sole purpose of killing the tyrant Reinhard Bonukid. It was similar to the treasures from the bottom of the sea that Cain had absorbed, but instead of disassembling materials, Starfish absorbed metal. In the middle of the battle, Cain found it impossible to disassemble the spear while he was being attacked. His only option was to strike first, but Starfish was quick to stop him. His powers were versatile, functioning as both defense and attack, which made it nearly impossible for Cain to land a hit. Despite the strength of the shows Cain effortlessly eliminating wrongdoers. But then his sword breaks, just as 2 men, wounded but still alive, attempt to Starfish's ability. Cain was determined to find a weakness. It took a while, but Cain noticed that Starfish was adjusting the strength of the protective layer around him, manipulating the metal. Even though it only took him 0.1 seconds to make these adjustments, Cain realized that it was his chance. Using his incredible speed, he lunged forward, and in the blink of an eye, delivered a powerful blow to the starfish. The starfish went flying through the air, clearly stunned by the unexpected hit. However, the starfish didn't suffer any damage, since its body was as hard as metal, so it received no damage from blunt attacks. Cain began to consider what the starfish's weakness could be. He had already tried attacking it, with swords and punches, but nothing had worked. He was now completely out of mana, unable to use magic. With no other options available, he was left with no choice than to trust in his sword. He opened the mimic, and the sword materialized. The blade, now fully manifested, was the divine sword known as Mistine. Starfish, furious, assumed that Cain was mocking him, especially when a wooden sword suddenly appeared out of thin air. However, it soon became clear that it was no ordinary wooden sword. Without using mana, Cain quickly severed the starfish's arms. The speed and efficiency of his attack were astonishing. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of price Cain had paid in order to wield such a powerful weapon. But there was a misunderstanding. Cain, timelines and dimensions, sacrificing 9 lives in the process. Each time, the result was the same. The world was reduced to ruins by the hand of, take advantage of his unarmed state. As they charged at him, Cain used the broken blade to slit one of their throats. The other man tried to stop him, but lunged forward and explained that he had never fought with his full strength before. Not because he was unable to, but because there had never been a weapon powerful enough, strong enough to handle his power. This marked the first time he would unleash his true strength, and he questioned whether the starfish could withstand even a single blow. As he swung the sword, the starfish simply vanished, obliterated in an instant. The sword had endured the force of the strike, and the anonized feeling was exhilarating. His grandfather had always told him that fighting with a sword was exciting, but Cain had never fully understood what he meant until now. Now he finally comprehended it. Cain checked to see if the starfish had gathered any information about him. After a brief inspection, he found a data verification, but before he could process anything further, everything began to blur. It might have been due to blood loss. The princess arrived shortly after, but before she could even speak, Cain fainted. Sometime later, he plunged into another dream, this time fighting as a true villain. However, this time he wasn't facing the princess, but a different girl. Her name was Serena Soret, and she held the title of the light that pursues the truth. After a fierce battle, the outcome was the same as before. Cain was killed, this time by Serena herself. When Cain awoke, he found himself in an inn. The princess was asleep at a nearby table. Seeing the divine artifact resting on her, Cain struck him hard, stopping short of killing him, though he left him seriously injured and bleeding on the ground. After leaving him lying there, Cain reflected on how Cain realized that it had completely taken root within her. He couldn't believe he had fainted twice in a row, but what was worrying him was the feeling that time was passing in much the same way as before. The more time elapsed, the more detailed his dreams became. He began to wonder, was this his future? If so, was there any hope for him, or was his only path to destroy this world, regardless of the decisions he made? If that were the case, he didn't know how he could continue living. Suddenly, the princess woke up, and it became clear that she hadn't been trying to sleep at all. She had simply fallen asleep. He had been trying to contact the second continent using the communication device that they had recovered from the Atla base. Unfortunately, he hadn't been successful. None of her codes, communication wasn't working, and despite all his hard work to obtain the device, he still couldn't make contact. Now, he was at a loss for what to do. Cain, realizing there was no other option, requested that he hand over the communication device. After inputting the correct code, it finally activated and connected to the second continent. On the other side of the device was the princess's father, the king himself. Cain had used his grandfather's communication code from the first continent, leading the king to believe that Reinhardt was the one contacting him after so much. It was difficult not to kill, but simply to knock someone unconscious. He recognized the man as a nobody, weak, ignorant, and surrounded by a silence. He immediately began screaming in rage. The reason for his fury was clear. Reinhardt had stolen his divine artifact, and naturally, the king. He was furious, but there was something more to it. Reinhardt had left an ominous letter explaining that he was borrowing the divine artifact for a while, and that he would return it later. He also requested that they take good care of the communication device, because without it, he wouldn't be able to contact them. Therefore, the king still had the device in his possession. The king continued shouting without pausing, but after a while, he realized that the person on the other end wasn't Reinhardt, but his daughter, and he didn't understand why she had it. However, that wasn't the main issue. The princess quickly asked him if he was alone, and after he confirmed that he was, she explained a question then arose in the king's mind. Why did his daughter have the communication device that was supposed to belong to Reinhardt in the first place? Princess didn't know how to respond, so Cain whispered in her ear, suggesting she make something up to say. As he whispered, she blushed. Being a half-fox, her ears were a sensitive spot for her. Embarrassed, she managed to make something up, even though she had no idea that Cain didn't understand animal language. After hanging up the call, the princess learned that Cain was Reinhardt's grandson. Not long after, she began talking about how much they resembled each other, stating that she knew from the beginning that there was something familiar about them. The princess asked why Cain hadn't let her explain everything to her father. After White Aura, Cain had seen him once during a chance meeting with his grandfather, and based on that memory, he decided to spare his life. From a high vantage point, after all, Reinhardt hadn't stolen the artifact with the intention of keeping it, he had planned to return it. However, Cain pointed out that it was better not to. To reveal this, since the Beast King was known for his terrible temper and eagerness to fight. Later, they decided to analyze the data chip that they had recovered from Starfish. While reviewing the data, they found a video featuring Serena Surrett, one of the 3 people with whom Cain had a strong connection. But why was she in the video? It turned out that Atla had been investigating her activities. The data chip also contained information regarding Cain, and it declared him dead, an error based on incorrect information provided by the maid. Just as they were about to shut down the device, they discovered that the invasion rate of the 3rd continent was listed as 0%. This meant that the information they had received from the AT base was, Barackle was wrong. Cain suspected that the Starfish's data was more up to date. Recently, the 3rd continent had recovered all of the crucial machinery that Atla had stolen, and they were reclaiming factories a mere 3 hours after Atla had conquered them. The question now was, who had managed to force them to retreat? It should have been nearly impossible, unless they had foreseen the future and planned accordingly. Cain's next plan was to first eliminate the remaining executives or return to the central continent. After that, they would move on to the other continent. Not far away, a man watched Cain in silence. Intrigued, he wondered how it was possible for an underage foreigner to have defeated an ogre. According to the king, the boss that Starfish mentioned would likely return to the central continent once he heard the news of his death. The head of Atla was a mysterious figure. Nobody knew their age, name, or even their gender. All they knew was that they called them the Absolute, and that they wielded a powerful weapon. Cain still didn't know if he could compete with this boss, but if he encountered them now, it was highly likely he would die. He also couldn't forget the note that his grandfather had left him, warning him that he would be killed by Atla. Cain returned the amulet that the princess had given him last time, which was meant to enhance his senses, and he lied, saying that he hadn't used it. The princess began to think deeply, and finally, understood. She realized that she had completely misinterpreted his intentions and had assumed that he was enjoying the violence without knowing what was really happening. Without thinking too much about it, they decided to go back to sleep, knowing that it wouldn't be long before the executives from Atla invaded the central continent. As Cain had expected, after receiving the report about the destruction of the headquarters, 4 mid-level executives were dispatched to investigate the extent of the damage. However, during the investigation, those executives were found dead. The person who discovered this believed it wasn't just an incident, but something more. He then sent a request for support to higher-level executives, just Black Wolf in a single blow. He murmured that Cain was no ordinary human. Then, seeing him spare the man on the ground, he quietly wondered if he was. As soon as the request was sent, Cain killed him as well. By the way, for those who don't know, Cain was also the one who killed all the high-ranking executives. Mediocre. Meanwhile, after seeing the request, the head of Atla, also known as the Absolute, grew excited at the prospect of meeting the person responsible for killing all the executives. A few days later, at the central port of Suru, Cain and the princess learned that the remaining executives would be arriving soon, so they decided to wait there. They also planned to scout the area, but the princess believed that if they disguised themselves, they wouldn't be able to distinguish the executives from one another. However, Cain could differentiate them, even though he couldn't explain it to the princess. Suddenly, Cain felt a familiar aura, like the warmth of the sun. The source of this aura was the sword god and his disciple, Ryu Surin. However, there was something else accompanying them, a massive black mist swirling in chaotic patterns unlike anything Cain had ever witnessed before. Before he could react, the sword god sensed a deadly threat and teleported behind Cain, believing him to be an assassin sent to kill him, greet him in the dead of night. But as he got closer, he recognized Cain from a month prior. If you don't recall that scene, I won't remind you. Cain also recognized him as the figure who had been observing him. Cain reasoned that if the sword god had been to the 4th continent, he must have known of him, deliberately leaving him alive, perhaps so another could finish him off. Suddenly, a girl appeared behind him, calling him master, and urging him to. At that moment, Cain had no idea what the sword god was planning. He considered explaining himself, but what if the sword god was involved with Atla, which would explain his earlier observation. Despite his uncertainty, Cain decided to explain himself, telling the sword god that he hadn't come with bad intentions, that he was actually looking for someone else, and that the sword god had simply wandered into his line of sight. Just then, Ryu Surin, the sword god's precious disciple, arrived and declared that this couldn't be a coincidence, especially since they had only been 7 or 8 kilometers away from Cain. The presence of Ryu Surin reminded Cain of something his grandfather had told him, that she was the fated woman he was destined to fall in love with, along with the princess, also known as the Shrine Maiden, who watches over destiny, and Sorina Soret, the one who relentlessly pursues the truth. Those were the 3 women. Ryan thought it best to eliminate Cain immediately, believing he could easily join Atla, a risk they couldn't afford. However, before things could escalate any further, the man with the dark aura who had appeared previously arrived as well. It turned out he was another disciple of the sword god, of the sword. Cain detected no signs of body transformation magic, nor even traces of the Jeffriel school's disguise techniques. It was as if the man wasn't disguised at all. This was his true form. But if this was truly his real form, surely the sword god. Hurry. Before leaving with her, he replied that there was a place he needed to go first, and then he jumped off the cliff with the girl following him. Would have noticed something. Somehow, the man was concealing that level of malice, and Cain had no idea how he was accomplishing it. The disciples of the Dark Aura stopped Rayurin, telling them that they shouldn't jump to conclusions so quickly. Cain knew that he had to clear up the misunderstanding before that it got any worse. So, he showed them his emblem from the first continent, identifying himself as Reinhard Bonukid's grandson and a prince of the Ukid kingdom. Group was stunned. Cain didn't stop there. He even showed them the mimic that his grandfather had given him as further proof. After all of this, the god of the sword was finally convinced. He believed that there was no way someone like Reinhard's grandson could be a murderer. The man with the dark aura apologized for his rudeness and said that he would be delighted to become an acquaintance of Cain's. But before he could even finish his sentence, Cain, without hesitating for even a moment, he cut off his head. Ray Siren, filled with rage at witnessing the decapitation, charged toward Cain, but she was no match for him. Cain, he tried to explain that the man he had just killed was not his subordinate, but the head of Atla, known as the Absolute, the sword god, intervened, stopping Ray and declaring that if Cain was to be executed, it would be by his hand and not hers. Still, she didn't back down. Once the things calmed down a bit, the sword god demanded proof. He asked Cain to present evidence that his disciple had truly been the. When they reached the injured man, the girl asked who he was, but as soon as she realized he was a member of Black Wolf, her expression turned cold. Head of Atla, since there were no suspicious traces on Sion's corpse. However, Cain admitted that he had no evidence and no clear way to explain himself. Hearing this, the sword god's anger exploded. In his eyes, Cain had taken a life based solely on suspicion, and Reinhard appeared to have raised his grandson poorly. Without further warning, the sword god launched an attack. Cain knew that if he didn't counter this attack, he would die instantly. Just as the sword was about to strike him, Cain's mana suddenly surged back to him. He managed to block the blow with his sword. The sword god jumped back, preparing to attack once more, but before he could, his arm was severed. Everyone froze in shock. The question that everyone was asking was, who severed the sword god's arm? It was Sion. Even though his head was missing, he was still standing, sword in hand. He looked directly at the sword god and declared that Cain's head belonged to him. The scene then shifted to a flashback, showing Cain and his grandfather, deeply engaged in a discussion. For the first time, his grandfather told him about a powerful criminal organization that ruled the central continent, known as Atla. Regarding Atla's mysterious boss, the Absolute, nobody possessed any concrete information, neither about their abilities nor their true intentions. Even Cain's grandfather admitted that he knew nothing about him. The Absolute wasn't supposed to be a part of Cain's future, but Cain's actions had clearly. Drawing her sword, she asked in a chilling tone if she should finish him off. Luckily for the man, the major stopped her, saying that the law and the altered the course of fate, causing this chaos to erupt. That's why his grandfather warned him to be careful, as the Absolute might possess powers that Cain couldn't understand. Returning to the present, Cain felt grateful for the warning, even though he never anticipated that immortality would be one of those powers. Ryu Siren initially assumed that Sion was under some kind of spell, but the sword god quickly corrected her, stating that the man wasn't even Sion. Then, Sion spoke and insisted that he was Sion, the sword god's loyal disciple, even recalling personal memories from the past. Finally, he revealed his true form. The body that the sword god knew was nothing more than a disguise he had created, one that he had prepared long ago for the moment he would kill his master. Without saying a word, the sword god launched himself into battle, using everything at his disposal. His instincts were sharp, his strikes precise, but it wasn't enough. To everyone's astonishment, the sword god was completely surpassed. Seon fought with a strength that seemed to belong to a different realm altogether. The sword god felt a profound sorrow. Even with his instincts, he could sense the unfathomable power before him, and now, missing an arm, he knew he could no longer defeat his disciple. Realizing this, he ordered Cain and the others to escape with everything they could carry, promising to buy them time. Cain and the others obeyed without question. As they fled, Seon, Cain was born on the same day, at the same time, and in the same place as foretold. In the end, the king understood that escaping destiny was impossible, but rewriting it was not out of the question. Government would take care of it. However, the girl was still determined to kill him, so she asked why he had denied her permission. The old man explained that it was momentarily distracted watching them, and the sword god seized the opening. He was about to strike Seon, but Seon narrowly managed to evade the blow. Still, after a brief exchange, the sword god managed to pierce Seon's heart with his sword. However, even that wasn't enough to kill him, not even a blow to the heart. He was truly immortal. Seon suddenly ascended into the air, declaring that he knew that swordsmanship alone couldn't defeat the sword god, but he had other tricks up his sleeve. As he flew, he summoned a power reminiscent of Madara Uchiha's meteorite. Uchiha. An enormous rock appeared in the sky and began to fall towards the earth. Meanwhile, as Cain was running, he saw the meteorite. Something about it seemed familiar to him. Back on the battlefield, the sword god began to reflect on his life. 70 years ago, he had also been a disciple of someone, under his master's brutal training, almost died countless times. But he learned a critical lesson: never to let his guard down. From then on, that day, he swore that if he ever took on disciples of his own, he would be responsible for them until the very end. Now, he realized that losing his right arm was the price he paid for that negligence. Trusting Seon had been his failure as a teacher, and now it was his duty to take responsibility by ending the life of his disciple. With that resolve, the sword god unleashed his ultimate weapon. This would be his last gift to Seon. When he brandished it, his sword, request from someone who had been attacked by members of the Black Wolf. Upon hearing this, the girl was shocked and understood that the person who had cut through the entire meteorite, and Seon, along with it. Watching from a distance, Ryu Sirin thought that the sword god had finally won. But Cain, he said that they were still retreating. That man was not yet dead, and the sword god was aware of it as well. Seon's presence suddenly vanished, causing him to believe, which meant that Seon could be hidden nearby. In the next instant, Seon appeared behind the sword god and launched an attack, this time utilizing fire magic. The sword god tried to counter the attack, but something felt off. He couldn't feel the familiar sensation of cutting through mana. His sword was unable to penetrate the flames, and, in the end, he was struck by the fire. The damage inflicted was severe. The sword god was now on the ropes, in a precarious situation. Although he was still breathing, Seon decided to quickly finish things, aiming to deliver the final blow. However, before he could land the finishing strike, a sword pierced through his body. Torso. Who hit him? It was Ryu Sirin, along with the princess. The two of them had been concealing their presence using a formation that Seon hadn't noticed. However, under the pressure, his formation talisman burned out. In truth, they had never fled at all. It had really all been Cain's idea from the very beginning. He believed that if there was even the slightest opportunity to save the sword god and defeat the Absolute, then this was that chance. While Seon was talking to the princess and Ryu Sirin, distracted by their sudden appearance, he didn't notice what Cain was doing behind him. Cain was eliminated had detected his master's presence from an enormous distance. When they discovered the broken sword that Cain had used, using the elixir of life on the sword god. Then, Seon asked Cain if he knew from the beginning that Seon was pursuing him, and why. Cain did know. I knew it. The moment Seon summoned that meteorite earlier, something deep within Cain's mind was activated, a dream he had long forgotten. A very long time ago. In countless dreams that Cain had experienced, he had assumed many different identities. In one, they called him the Mad Destroyer. In another, a solitary king. And in yet another, he was the absolute being. In those visions, he made meteors rain down from the sky, wielded the power of the world, and used the power of creation to achieve everything he desired. He even created biological weapons unique to himself and invented the very concept of immortality. becoming incapable of dying. That same power, which was once contained within a ring, had now flowed into Seon. However, even now, the absolute being's power still. He yearned for Cain as if longing to return to his original master, and Seon found this to be an insult. The mere fact that Cain could steal his power simply by existing nearby was unacceptable. Enraged, Seon declared that he would kill Cain before he could take any more power and invoked his magic, quintal origin creation magic, the creation of life. Shadowy, wolf-like creatures materialized and lunged toward Cain. Cain attempted to strike them down, but it was futile. These beings did not desire to live, they were made to die. Even if he struck them, they would not truly perish. Seon had granted them the concepts of immortality. They understood that he hadn't used internal energy. If he had, the sword would have been protected by it. That revelation further motivated the Ama division. Every time they were wounded or killed, they split into even more. While Ela explained this ability as division, the behavior appeared more like multiplication, like multiplying. Regardless, Cain was now facing an endless horde. Returning to the battle, Cain realized that trying to kill the raider, wolves would only cause them to multiply further. With no other options, he focused on keeping them at bay. He turned to the princess and asked if she could use a sealing formation to trap the creatures. Unfortunately, Seon's magic had burned through all of her talismans. Even so, the princess said she could handle it if she had a little more time. Cain nodded and told them to focus on escaping. He would buy the necessary time for them. For now, his only goal was to delay the creatures and prevent their numbers from growing any further. When one of the wolves, as he grimly sank his teeth into it, Cain perceived the four forces that had been used in his creation: I, Koro, Bejane, and Sora, using his own. Using his magic, Cain managed to destroy the internal structure of the creature's runes, because those forces were originally his own. However, Seon was not surprised, already knowing about Cain's mana problem. Although Cain had managed to destroy one of the wolves, Seon was aware that Cain's destructive magic could only be used a few more times. Meanwhile, Cain believed that if he could hold out long enough for the sword god, girl, confirming in her mind that Cain's martial arts and swordsmanship were superior to her own. The scene then shifts to the central continent, a bustling place. To recover, there would still be a chance to win. However, Seon revealed that it was useless, as the magic he had used was a form of creation, conceptual, one that embodied death itself. In that state, the sword god would be trapped in a perpetual cycle of regeneration and decay, and once his life force was completely depleted, he would truly die. When Cain ran out of options, Rayurin arrived, as the sealing preparations had already been completed. After a short battle, they finally succeeded in sealing the creatures away. With that threat contained, Cain rushed toward the Khan, sword god, with the goal of extracting the deadly magic that Seon had implanted within him. Seon, unwilling to allow this, moved to intercept him. Ryu Suran attempted to stop Seon, but was pushed aside. Seon then succeeded in stabbing Cain with a sword. Instead of being harmed, Cain began to absorb the power of Seon. At that moment, Seon's backstory was revealed. 15 years prior, on the day he suddenly inherited the power of the Absolute, he immediately knew, instantly, about its original owner, Cain. He also realized that if Cain remained alive, the power would inevitably return to him, too. In order to avoid this, Seon decided that Cain had to be eliminated. He stabilized Atla and established a vast information network spanning all continents in his search. He dedicated over a decade to this mission. However, despite everything, he realized he was born incapable of defeating Cain. Returning to the present, Seon, where people from all continents gather. It's famous for showcasing regional products and specialties from every land. There, amidst the decided to escape before all of his powers returned to Cain. He used subspace quadruple origin creation magic to quickly flee the area, but, suddenly, he found himself sliced in half. It was the sword god who had struck him down. Back in his prime, the sword god had come to understand that within the border between life and death, there was no true boundary. And if there were no true limits, then naturally his sword could cut through anything. That realization allowed him to slash Seon even now, despite Seon having shifted to another space. In a panic, Seon attempted to flee once more, knowing that if he remained, he would surely die. What he failed to realize was that it was already too late. Cain had become the true absolute being. Cain shocked everyone. Without hesitation, he declared that Seon must receive the punishment appropriate for his crimes. He invoked the creation of the heavens and the earth burned like hell to incinerate Seon, creating an entire world solely for his execution. However, Instead of despairing, Seon burst into laughter. He believed that Cain had made a mistake in claiming the powers of the Absolute, thinking that this power would bind him to the Absolute concept of destiny, a curse in disguise. Then, after all of this, Seon took his own life. The only thing that remained was the power of the Absolute. The power spoke with Cain, stating that they were not separate beings, but one and the same. It believed that Cain had already agreed to kill Seon previously. But remembering amidst the crowd, we find our poor protagonist Cain, simply trying to get to the train station, though he's having trouble pushing his way through. Advice from his grandfather, he had to control his power himself. Cain rejected the power completely. He clarified that he had only taken a fragment of it to defeat Seon. After saying this, Cain departed and returned to his own world. There, he informed everyone that everything was finally all right, and the moment he said that, he collapsed and lost consciousness. From the heavens above, Cain's grandfather watched the events unfold, relieved and happy that Cain had not been consumed by the power. Just then, an angel named Nephilim approached him from behind and began to tease him for finally seeing him smile. As she sat beside him, the old man got up to leave. Before departing, he told her that when Cain arrived in heaven, he was entrusting Cain to her care. Nephilim accepted the responsibility, promising to faithfully fulfill her role as Cain's guide. In the next scene, Cain regained consciousness and he realized he had fainted. When he woke up, the mimic on the desk beside him began to move. Then, he noticed a letter. Next to it was a message from his grandfather. The letter stated that if Cain was reading it, he had successfully dealt with the Absolute. His grandfather mentioned that he had something important to share, but instead of writing it directly, he instructed Cain to have the mimic retrieve an object, labeled TK31, inside of which he had left the message he wanted to convey. Before Cain could retrieve the object, suddenly, a girl emerges from the crowd and, in an overly flirtatious tone, asks if he needs help, offering to read his fortune with a 50% discount. Rayson suddenly burst into the room, asking if he was all right. After all, he had been asleep for almost 3 days straight. The sword god entered right after, along with the princess. They had all come because they were worried about him. Without any hesitation, the sword god spoke, saying that he wanted to ask a direct question, without beating around the bush. He said that he had seen Cain transform into something that resembled the Absolute, not only in appearance, but even the power he used felt identical. The sword god wanted to know what Cain's true connection to the Absolute was. Cain didn't want to reveal the whole truth, so he told them that it was just a side effect of absorbing the Absolute's mana. His response surprised everyone. After all, the idea that someone could absorb the mana of the Absolute was unthinkable. Cain explained that this ability was fundamental to his power, but he couldn't go into further details. The only thing he could assure them was that the Absolute no longer existed, and that its power had disappeared. There was nothing to fear anymore. Out of respect for Cain's privacy, no one insisted any further. They accepted that he had his own secrets and decided not to pry. The sword god then explained to Cain that they had confronted Atla's remaining forces, effectively eradicating Atla entirely. The spies hidden throughout the continent had dispersed, and the second continent was now safe. They had accomplished all of this, while Cain was fortune with a 50% discount. Just as Cain is about to turn her down, she mentions a fortune teller from the second continent who can see fate itself. Asleep, Cain felt grateful for their efforts, but the sword god insisted that he should be the one thanking Cain for exposing Satan and save him, otherwise everything would have gone wrong. After that, everyone left, urging Cain to rest. However, once they were gone, he decided to recover TE31, the object his grandfather had instructed him to find. Once the recovery process was complete, Cain discovered that TE31 wasn't an object at all, but a virtual space. As soon as he entered it, the system began playing a video, recorded by the previous user. Above, his grandfather. In the video, Cain's grandfather was shown fighting him in alternate worlds. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't prevent Cain from awakening as the Absolute, because Cain was of his own blood. His grandfather believed that the young Cain was innocent, and so he fought the older version of himself in different worlds. But despite his determination, he failed most of the time. He even managed to kill the young Cain. However, another version always appeared, version of Cain, and no matter how many times the young Cain was killed, the destruction continued relentlessly. Desperate, his grandfather decided to try different methods. His journey led him to seek the truth of this world. He eventually discovered 3 destinies deeply connected to Cain. These 3 women, were destined to be the ones Cain would love. Do I really have to name them all? Okay, I won't. Ryu Soren, known as the Destiny that, hearing this, another girl with fox ears appears, claiming that she can see the fate of others, but not her own. With just a glance, Cain realizes, reverses martial arts. The princess, whose name Cain did not know, but who was also called the priestess who sees destiny. And last, Serena Soret, known as the light that pursues the truth. These were the only three who could stop Cain. In the end, his grandfather cultivated the three destinies and managed to kill Cain. However, only a handful of people survived the ordeal. After going through 9 cycles, he finally understood something crucial. No matter what methods he used, Cain would always resurface with even greater powers, as if it were a predetermined destiny. Whether he fought, desperately, or simply observed from the sidelines, the world always ended in the same way, at the same time, and on the same day. Not a single trace of hope remained. He believed that all his efforts had been in vain, and after experiencing the 100th world, he had accumulated a wealth of knowledge, experiences. Finally, he reached a decision. The only option left was to kill the young Cain. This was the best course of action, and he shouldn't hesitate. He knew very well that if he didn't act, disaster would soon occur, but in the end, he couldn't bring himself to do it. At that moment, the young Cain was just an innocent, smiling baby. That's when he made a new decision. Instead of killing Cain, he would mold him into an unyielding man. If his destiny could be avoided, then he would ensure that Cain became strong enough that no fate could interfere with him. The videos? Instead of fighting destiny, he decided to transform Cain into someone who could defy it. He vowed to raise the child to be so powerful, so firm in spirit and will, that she belongs to the Silver Fox clan, but she's surprised to see him looking at her and thinking that perhaps he's interested, invites him to have his fortune read. Cain was watching weren't just fragmented moments, they were recordings of his grandfather's 9 past lives in different worlds, and what was. Experiencing it in his dream wasn't a possible future, but the true reality of his own existence. Despite knowing everything, Cain's grandfather, he still chose to let him live. The system then informed Cain that the previous user, his grandfather, had left him a message. In the message, his grandfather apologized for having always claimed that he had the power to see destiny. The truth, however, was that his grandfather had lived through 9 different futures. He explained that he had kept this a secret until he was sure that Cain would not be consumed by fate. Now he felt it was time to entrust everything to Cain. Then, his grandfather told Cain that, based on his experiences, the destruction of the world was already predetermined by fate. Even if Cain managed to escape this evil fate, someone else would inevitably take his place, bringing chaos in their wake. Therefore, Cain had to become stronger, strong enough to defeat the second absolute being who would inevitably appear. Once the message finished playing, the PROS system automatically closed the virtual space. The next morning, Cain met with the princess and Ran, who were already having breakfast at the table. Cain noticed that the sword god wasn't there. Then, Rayurin explained that he had something he needed to check on. At that moment, the sword god returned, explaining that, together, she even offered to pay for everything herself. Still, Cain politely declines her offer. The fox girl admits that it's her first time on the... It seemed the communication blocks had been lifted, because he had just received a message from his disciple on the 4th continent. The princess thought that, now that the communication blockades had been lifted, he could finally contact his father on the 2nd continent. However, the sword god explained that, while possible, speaking with his father would be difficult. He told everyone to prepare themselves, as what he was about to share was troubling. He revealed that, according to his disciple, the capital of the 2nd continent, Sorakasia, and the Vistran royal family, had fallen. Currently, Sorakasia was completely sealed off by magic, and even communication with the Heavenly Emperor, who had traveled to the 2nd continent, had been severed. Beyond that, no further information was known. The fact that the Heavenly Emperor had personally gone to the 2nd continent, it must have been something serious. The princess began to worry, fearing that everyone, her father, her brother, and Nariel, were already dead. But Cain, he reassured her, telling her to calm down because the Beast King wouldn't fall so easily. He was a strong king. They all agreed that the most sensible thing to do was head to the 2nd continent immediately. The sword god also decided to join them, although he added that he first had something to resolve with the sword sect. However, he didn't feel the need to rush, especially since the Absolute One was already dead. Without wasting any more time, they, Central Continent, and that doing everything alone, makes her somewhat uncomfortable. In the end, she also decides to skip the fortune reading, leaving the poor fortune teller without a set off towards the second continent. In the next scene, they were aboard the airship. Already on their way, Cain noticed that the guard had become even stronger than before. He approached the sword god, praising him for his recent battle with the Absolute, noting that he had managed to land an attack while the enemy was phasing between different dimensions. According to the sword god, that strike defied logic. Nobody had ever been able to comprehend such a feat. However, Cain had accomplished it, which greatly surprised the sword god. At his young age, Cain had already grasped the boundaries between life and death. Before they could continue their conversation, they suddenly spotted a sky dragon soaring nearby. They had heard that sky dragons were occasionally sighted traveling through the skies, but this was no ordinary dragon. It was the first and strongest dragon. Born alongside the world, the sky dragon could sense an immense amount of mana radiating from him, even from a great distance. Rayurin and the princess. They also emerged, sensing the powerful mana and initially fearing an attack, but they were reassured by the sword god's explanation, who clarified that it was simply the sky dragon. Much to their surprise, the dragon approached them, catching everyone off guard. Despite its intimidating presence, the dragon had no intention of harming them. It explained that it had come to honor the ancient covenant with the Vistran bloodline. Customer. Frustrated, the fortune teller grumbles about her bad luck, while another girl tells the fox girl that she should do something about it. But the fox girl, the princess's family. However, the dragon was taken aback when it recognized Cain, the apostle of the end, and had never expected to encounter him there. The sky dragon, sensing the destiny that bound them together, decided to speak with Cain. To do this, the dragon stopped time for everyone, except Cain, and, to explain that, Cain was now a singularity, a being who had escaped the bonds that had previously restricted him. He was a man born to fulfill the destiny of the apocalypse, but now that destiny had changed in an unexpected way. The dragon stated that the one responsible for Cain's transformation must be someone who had interfered with the bonds that once controlled him, Cain's grandfather. Whether this change was a blessing or a curse, the dragon could no longer predict how it would affect the future, so he explained that he would now observe Cain's path through the eyes of his contractor, Chapelbast, the princess. The dragon quickly formed a contract with her, as she was destined to inherit an ancient pact from an old friend. Originally, the dragon, he had planned to wait until the princess came to him, but now, with the fate of the world at stake, he had no choice but to act immediately. The princess, still confused and unaware of what was happening, she realized she could move again once the dragon's influence faded. The dragon then explained that Sorakasia, once blessed by the heavens, was now headed towards destruction. If she wasn't stopped, everything would disappear completely. He instructed them to go to asks her to let it go. After all, she was a bit rude too. Still, the other girl insists that those fakers were using the name of the real Dornoan if they wanted to prevent its destruction, and to use any means necessary to protect the land. Once the dragon finished speaking, he decided to leave, and with a single pinch, everything began to shine. Cain suddenly found himself in a room with Rayusurin. The sky dragon had teleported them there, and now they had a new mission ahead. They had been teleported there, and now had a new mission ahead of them. Rayu Serena, not understanding how she had ended up in the room with Cain, didn't. She believed him when he said he had spoken with the dragon of the sky, since, to her knowledge, dragons were transcendent beings that they were interfering in the human world. Before they could discuss it further, they suddenly heard footsteps coming from outside the room. Cain, quick. To take action, he suggested they leave and talk about it later. They hurried out of the room, and as they stepped outside, the two people who were outside, they went in to check, but found the room empty. Outside, Cain and Rayusurin found themselves on an unknown street, still unaware where the others had gone, such as the princess and the sword god. However, their main concern was figuring out where they were. Cain assumed they were on the second continent, but he had no idea of their specific location. Rayusurin confirmed that they were not in Sorakasia because they had been told that it had been sealed off. However, this place seemed perfectly fine, which raised even more questions than answers. As fortune teller who could see destiny, just to make money. However, the fox girl didn't mind it. If she reacted to every little thing, she would never. They walked through the streets. Rayusurin was drawn to a vendor offering food, possibly sweets, and decided to stop and inquire. He casually inquired about their location, wondering where they were. To their surprise, the vendor confirmed that they were in Sorakasia. Cain, noticing the The Vistron castle flag also corroborated the vendor's statement, but something felt off. Sorakasia was supposed to be isolated because of a mana anomaly. However, everything around them seemed perfectly normal. The vendor, overhearing their conversation, brushed them off, assuming that those strange children were spreading bizarre rumors. Nevertheless, Kane and Ryu decided to investigate further. Ryu initially suggested that it might be just a false rumor, but then he recalled a crucial detail. The information came directly from the Heavenly Emperor, and, most importantly, they had been sent there by the Sky Dragon, which indicated that something was clearly amiss. Ryu Surin also entertained the possibility that a barrier might have been erected, one capable of influencing the minds of those within and preventing them from recognizing the abnormal situation. He theorized that if 500 to 600 trained, mid-level Onmyoji collaborated, they could execute such a technique. While Onmyoji were rare, this scenario, though improbable, was still theoretically possible. However, even she had to concede that the chances of such a large group working, he would finally have peace. What really worried him, though, was the man they had just met. Nariel, the other girl, misinterpreted his silence and assumed that she, together, were slim. Something was definitely wrong, and they needed to investigate the mystery further. They decided to depart from the capital to investigate further. As they approached a guarded gate, they were abruptly stopped by the guards, who declared that the area was restricted. Kane explained that they were looking for a way to leave the capital. A guard found this ridiculous, dismissively saying that there was absolutely nothing out there. Out there. The guard emphatically clarified his statement, saying, "The world is Sorakasia, and Sorakasia is the world itself." In reality, they were under a spell, and Sorakasia was sealed off by magic, which made them believe that Sorakasia was the entire world and that there was nothing beyond it. After being turned away at the entrance to the city, Kane and Ryu decided to investigate the area outside of Sorakasia. Kane confirmed the presence of an invisible barrier, which surrounded the area but confessed he didn't know the specifics. They decided their priority was to find the priestess and the sword god, since they believed the priestess, as a high-ranking exorcist, would understand magical barriers. Agreeing with this, they returned to town to investigate. Research. When they inquired about the priestess and mentioned she was a local resident, someone clarified that they must be referring to Princess C. Villavistran, only to surprisingly reveal that the princess had died 10 years ago. Both reacted in disbelief, which led the resident, the fox had fallen in love with him. The fox girl clarifies that it isn't love. What intrigued her was that she couldn't see his destiny. Kane's destiny was completely resident to suggest that perhaps they had encountered a recently arrested imposter, which piqued their interest even further. The villager, he explained that the supposed false princess had broken into the castle, and the Beast King had arrested and imprisoned her. Hearing this, Kane concluded, internally, that the memories of the Beastmen, including the king, had been manipulated, and that this supposed imposter must be the priestess they were searching for. They thanked the villager and set off, declaring their intention to investigate further. Near a wall, Ryu asked Kane if he planned to rescue C from the castle, prison, and questioned whether that was feasible. Kane dismissed the concern, revealing that he knew a secret passage. They located a hidden mechanism in the wall, and Kane brought out the mimic to retrieve Tupus's revelation, which generated a key. Using the key opened a secret door in the wall. They entered a luminous tunnel. Ryu was surprised by the key and the passage, and Kane explained that the key came from an object with a divine connection, and that the tunnel had been created during an invasion of the castle 10 years ago by someone fleeing after stealing certain objects. The passage led to the underground warehouse of Vistra Castle, near the prison. Upon exiting the tunnel into the warehouse, they were confronted by the Beast King, Leoville Vistran, who suspected that they used the false princess as a distraction to enter the castle. Kane, recognizing him, noticed that, blank, colorless, and odorless. Something like this had never happened to her before, and she couldn't help but get closer. Although she couldn't see his future, she had seen that he was he was at a disadvantage without mana, and attempted to defuse the situation, raising his hands and declaring that they did not want to fight. However, the Beast King, he dismissed his guards and immediately attacked. The king acknowledged Kane's sharp intuition when he dodged the first blow. Ryu Surin called the king despicable for launching a surprise attack. The king, finding the irony in being called that by an intruder, vowed to show no mercy and activated a blood flow technique that enhanced his physical abilities. He unleashed a furious punch, yelling, "Die." Realizing he couldn't evade it, Kane decided to block using the principles of Bajikwan, deflecting the blow with a circular movement, and then counterattacking the king's face. The surprised king clutched his jaw and questioned if that weak counterattack was all Cain had to offer, despite managing to infiltrate the castle so deeply. Then, he declared that he would fight with all his strength, intensifying his attack. While defending himself, Cain realized that he couldn't deflect the continuous blows, and it wasn't long before the king's punch broke the bones in his hand. The attacker declared, "This ends here." But suddenly, Ryu Surin, he shouted, "Duck!" and launched an attack with his sword. The Beast King recognized the weapon. Cain warned her that it was impossible to face him alone. But Ryu Surin said, "It's okay, I'll handle this." She immediately engaged in sword combat against the king. As their swords clashed, Cain observed in amazement that train ticket, which meant they shared the same destination. And, strangely, he reminded her of someone from 10 years ago, a mysterious man with... Ryu shouldn't be able to fight on equal terms with the king, but her technique had improved dramatically. Then he realized that Ryu, he was using blood flow, a technique that was thought to be exclusive to beastmen. When asked if he had been concealing his power, Ryu denied it, explaining that she suddenly felt lighter and instinctively knew how to move, while also showing confusion about what was happening. Cain wondered in silence what could be the cause of this sudden awakening. The Beast King stopped abruptly and remarked that Ryu's sword seemed familiar to him, asking about his master. Upon hearing the name of the sword god, Wei Timing, the king appeared to vaguely recall him. He was surprised by his own lack of knowledge regarding famous figures within the Vistran royal family. He then inquired whether the sword resembled the legendary lost sword of the Vistran royalty, and furiously demanded to know how an outsider had accomplished this, all while unleashing intense magical pressure. Ryu, Surin, and Cain felt this pressure, and a new figure appeared, enveloped in a blue aura, surprised to see that the others were already present. It was the old master, the god of the sword. Sensing the powerful pressure emanating from the god of the sword, the Beast King questioned his identity and intentions. The god of the sword assessed the situation, and Cain declared that rescuing the princess was the top priority. The god of the sword instructed them both to proceed, that no prophecy could ever bind him. The protagonist reflects on the deep respect he feels for his grandfather and teacher, recalling their first, an equally invisible destiny. That man had stolen the first Beast King's treasure, and she still remembered his words, although she had no idea where. He would handle the king, despite the king's threat that he wouldn't let them pass. The god of the sword insisted, allowing them to escape amidst the guards, assisted by a powerful shockwave created during the battle, helped Ryu Surin and Cain rescue the princess an hour later. Then, we see them running toward a secret cave, a place known only to Nariel. Cain explained to the sword god that it was the celestial dragon who had guided them, a voice that not even the sword god could hear. The conversation then shifted to the barrier surrounding them. The priestess revealed that the barrier had been created by a single person, describing its complex structure as centered on a heart, where she had seen the silhouette of a human figure. What was at the center of the barrier? He explained that the entire formation followed the principles of yin and yang and the 5 elements, and that the center of all that was the heart of the barrier. He noticed it immediately, due to the annihilation of mana present there. The sword god expresses his concern about the fact that a single exorcist can maintain such a powerful barrier is concerning. When asked if Ryu and Surincistas are strong, he replies that it's not that they are strong, but that they are annoying to deal with because they always use every trick possible to escape. And the worst part is that they will have to be inside the barrier to find them. Based on the size of the barrier, he calculates that there could be around 4,000 different possible locations where the heart could be. Was now. Returning to the present, he smiled, feeling that perhaps he would meet that man again. Meanwhile, our hero was pondering of the barrier, and if the exorcist is powerful, that number could increase to around 10,000 possible locations. While they are pondering this, suddenly, Nariel appears and recognizes the priestess as the princess. After 10 years, Nariel reaffirms her faith in the princess, despite the hardships of the past and the king's disbelief. Upon arriving, he begins to recall some childhood moments of the princess that she'd rather no one hear. Nariel explains that the Beast King went slightly mad due to the princess's disappearance and has held a grudge ever since. Nobody understands why Nariel recognizes the princess, but it is suggested that their strong bond allowed her to resist the manipulation spell. Seeing the connection between them, Ryu Surin also wishes she had a friend like that. Forgetting that she already has the god of the sword, Cain reassures her, saying that she will find someone like that too. Those kinds of friendships. Suddenly, Nariel coughs up blood and collapses. The princess attempts to use healing magic, but the sword god warns her against it. May it not do so because of the corrupted mana within her. Cain notices something strange and pulls the princess away from Nariel. Nariel is now enveloped in a black aura and wields a sword that Cain recognizes instantly. It is the same sword he used in his third life, when he reigned as the master of all creation. Nariel attempts to attack them, but Cain knocks her unconscious and ties her up securely. After capturing her, Cain explains that Nariel resisted the barrier's spells, which resulted in the fox girl, who appeared to be around his age. He wondered if she was the woman his grandfather had once told him about, one of the 3 stars. The barrier, which he describes as the immune system of the shadow world, attempting to kill her, even though it later revived her. When asked if she knows more about this, the barrier of the shadow world, Cain confirms he remembered it upon seeing the shadows envelop Nariel. He explains that the barrier absorbs them all, the living creatures within, transforming them into shadow puppets. The priestess asks if that means Nariel and her family are no longer really themselves, to which Cain responds in the affirmative. She feels relieved, believing her family can be restored if the barrier is destroyed, but Cain corrects her, clarifying that being absorbed is like being digested, implying a more permanent and destructive transformation. Cain delivers devastating news. Sorakasia, including the Beast King and the priestess's family, has already been annihilated. Everyone who lived there was absorbed and used to create the current world inside the barrier. Hearing this, the priestess reacts with horror before fainting. Later, while C rests, Ryu asks Surin Cain what his plan is. Cain declares that he intends to kill the summoner and dispel the Maffin's barrier before dawn, which leads his companion to ask if he knows where the summoner is. Cain explains that, based on the components of the Shadow World ritual, the heart of the barrier should be located in the Beast King's room, on the top floor of the palace, destined to influence his constellation. She was the fortune teller of the Silver Fox clan, fated to pierce his heart with a spear. Cain smiled, but, meanwhile, elsewhere, a shadowy figure sits on a throne, observing a luminous projection of Cain. After a long time, but now, thanks to the Absolute's final message before his death, he knows how to seal it forever within the nightmare of the shadow world. Gathering power in his hand, he declares his intention to escape his destiny and live as he pleases, as the true king of all creation. This master of everything created resides within the Beast King's private chamber on the 8th floor, protected by shadow puppets. The Beast King is identified as the most dangerous opponent. The plan is to attack swiftly before the master can react, summon all the puppets, and strengthen the king. Beast. The best opportunity will be tomorrow during the national prayer dedicated to the first Beast King, as the current king and other important figures will be absent from the castle. The attack is set for tomorrow. The guards react to the intrusion by shouting and attempt to stop the attackers. The Sword God. The Sword God quickly eliminates several guards and orders his companions to go up to the top floor to search for the summoner, while he takes care of the enemies. Everyone obeys. The scene shifts to a conversation from the previous day, where they were planning their next move. The Sword God suggests that only he and Cain should head to the castle, while the other two, Surin and C, stay behind. C objects and insists on accompanying them. Something didn't quite add up. The fortune teller was supposed to be his enemy. She should have been able to foresee his destiny, but she couldn't, and that troubled him. He wondered if his destiny, even though he appears somewhat unstable. The Sword God warns him not to let his emotions compromise the mission, and asks if he is truly all right. She insists that she is needed, and argues that her skills as an exorcist are necessary to combat an enemy who casts spells. The Sword God accepts, deciding that C will accompany Cain, while Surin will be in charge of protecting her. An agreement is reached, but Cain imposes a condition. If C loses control, he himself will have to stop her. As the group advances, dark shadows suddenly erupt, which Cain identifies as an illusory barrier trap designed to send intruders into the void. Cain warns that once activated, it cannot be stopped by normal means, and asks the priestess to use the arrangement of the 8 lights. Although initially surprised, she obeys and releases a bright energy that counteracts the shadows. The priestess observes how the shadows recede, and he explains that the formation absorbs mana. Finally understanding why Cain suggested he use it, he remarks that it's better to consume than to be consumed. However, Cain realizes that the master likely anticipated the priestess could counter the trap and wonders what her true purpose is. Suddenly struck by an idea, he shouts to the priestess, throwing his sword to her, telling her that she'll need it. The priestess catches the object from the throne while still enveloped in the illusory barrier trap. The trap consumes her, pulling her into the deep void, had shifted towards neutrality, and if that were the case, whether other destinies had changed as well. According to his grandfather, more than 20 people were born with the destiny, as she disappears in front of Cain and Ryu Surin. Surin asks Cain if she sacrificed herself for them, and Cain confirms it. Surin, filled with rage and anger, questioning how Cain could ask him to do that. Cain explains that it was the most logical choice to prevent everyone from being caught, and he reveals that he knew about the barrier and that the priestess's technique was capable of defeating it. Cain admits to feeling guilty and states that he plans to rescue C later. Surin is shocked and asks if C isn't actually dead. Cain confirms that C is alive and questions why Surin thought they would abandon her, revealing that giving him the sword was part of his plan. Cain encourages Surin to keep moving forward. As they advance, they encounter a large battle taking place outside the castle. Perhaps the Beast King and the Sword God are already fighting. Upon reaching the 7th floor, Cain has a bad feeling because they didn't encounter any more traps on the way. Path. He explains that the Beast King's room on the next floor nullifies the use of mana, meaning any remaining traps must be on the current floor. He warns Surin to be careful, and she nods in agreement. Suddenly, a voice welcomes them, calling them villains attempting to commit murder. A new figure appears before them, surprising them. The figure declares that they will not be allowed to pass. Surin identifies the figure as Tente, Sam. Cain internally recognizes Tente as the Imperial family's immensely powerful shield, on the same level as the Sword God. Tente asks, "Kill him," and that's only counting the major destinies. If minor ones were included, the number would exceed 100. To twist each of those destinies and escape death, if they recognize her. Surin realizes that Tente doesn't remember her, and Cain deduces that she is the Master's strongest pawn, which would explain the Beast King's absence and her connection to the barrier. When Surin strikes him, Tente attacks. Surin blocks the attack, noting that reasoning with him is impossible. She tells Cain to advance to the 8th floor while she confronts Tente. Cain asks if Surin can handle her alone. She admits that maybe not, but declares that they can win. She prepares to fight using the Celestial style, a technique that Tente recognizes. Cain watches, recognizing Surin's style from a past life, and notes that she has awakened previous abilities, possibly connected to his own past identity. Surin orders Cain to leave while she contains Tente. Cain obeys, running towards a large entrance. Upon arrival, a voice from inside comments that Cain ignored Tente and came directly. Cain enters a majestic sanctuary. A voice welcomes him as Cain Bone Euclid, the former master of all creation. The current master greets him, explaining that the chamber is protected by a trauma, a barrier powered by creation itself that nullifies the use of mana, rendering it unbreakable for Cain and preventing him from absorbing its power. Cain recognizes the situation. The current master suggests a chat, noting Cain's early arrival, and proposes they talk during a game of chess, conjuring a board between them. Cain states that he doesn't like chess, but the master reminds him who holds the advantage in this situation, implying that accepting is the wiser course if he seeks answers. Death. That was both his starting point and his ultimate goal. Sometime later, Cain finally arrived at Ironhard, an enormous shop in the MS division. The master makes the first move, pawn to e4, and asks why the master chose a trauma to act as a barrier instead of using all of it for creation, which could have resulted in something more powerful. The master answers that he chose a trauma because other barriers are opaque, and he wanted to witness Cain's suffering as he loses. Cain moves the knight to f6. The teacher captures a pawn with his knight. Knight takes e5 and states that the current barrier is sufficient and that he learned everything about Cain thanks to the absolute. Cain recognizes this and asks if that is the reason they used the priestess to bring them to the second continent. The teacher explains the nature of the shadow world barrier, stating that it exists separately. It doesn't use the summoner's mana and can be maintained indefinitely. Cain moves the knight. c6 asks if his only goal is to capture him. The master confirms, stating he wants to capture him to become the new master of everything in creation. Cain asks why he doesn't simply kill him. The master replies that he doesn't want to repeat the absolute's mistake and considers trapping him the safest path towards victory, moving his pawn to 3. Cain asks if he is afraid. Pressing him further, Cain slams the table and demands, what will happen if his backup arrives? The master dismisses the arrival of others as irrelevant. But he's forgetting someone. Seville Vistron, considered the most dangerous, who was sent away. Capital of the central continent, he had come to meet someone, Cale DePel, a renowned blacksmith. At the reception, a girl named Emmy assumed the master dismisses her, believing she cannot escape the illusory barrier alone. Kane moves his bishop to g4 and implies that C wasn't alone before. Declares checkmate. Master Ken sock. Kane scoffs, offering a rematch, even without his queen, to make it easier for him. The scene then shifts. C wakes up abruptly. A figure leans over, asking her why she's crying and if she had a nightmare. C sits up and sees figures resembling her. Family, mom, dad, brother, Nariel, and she believes they are alive. She hugs her mother, thinking the past tragedies were just a dream. However, memories of destruction and death flash through her mind. Her father suggests having tea, but C notices a familiar sword on the ground. Miss Tiltine, a memory, shows Kane giving her that sword. She realizes that his presence signifies that this reality is an illusion. Although she wishes she could stay, C decides to return to the real world. Reality. He wields the sword, bids farewell to illusions, and the illusory world shatters. The scene reverts to the chess match. The current master declares checkmate, stating that Kane's arrogance in sacrificing the queen led to his downfall. Kane congratulates him but insists that he would have won, even with the queen, asserting that as long as the queen remains a factor, he will be victorious. The master dismisses this as a mere excuse. Kane retorts that, although the chess queen is off the board, reality is different, and his queen will return. Suddenly, the space around them cracks, with that he was just another annoying customer asking for a random, custom-made weapon. She informed him that an appointment was necessary to see Cale, but Kane had come prepared. Green energy, and C appears, declaring, "I have returned." The current master is astonished, questioning how C managed to escape. She positions herself next to Kane, and identifies herself as the princess and heir of the second continent. She addresses the current master as the self-proclaimed master of all creation and declares her intention to kill him. The master reacts in disbelief when C breaks the barrier to trauma. He laughs bitterly, acknowledging his defeat. Just as with the absolute before him, Kane asks him why he chose to fight them. The master repeats his previous reason, that the absolute's memories absolutely convinced him of his victory. But Kane rejects that idea, calling him a coward, declaring that even if he were to awaken as the master of all in creation, he would still prefer to hide rather than fight him. Despite having awakened as the master of all creation, when pressured to tell the truth, the master reveals with doubt that the memories of the absolute showed him that if he didn't quickly kill Kane to prove his worth, this man would erase his existence. He learned about this man not through memories alone, but through the power of everything in creation, which allows him to glimpse into the future. So, facing Kane Bonaclid, apostle of the end, became a matter of survival for the master. The teacher tells Kane that this man is his arch-enemy, who is destined to never be able to win against him. Kane steps forward, rejecting that destiny. C, worried, watches him as he clutches his meeting. Seated on an imposing throne, the old man, none other than Reinhard Bucklid, the founding king of the first continent and sovereign of a powerful nation, he handed her a sealed box, a gift from his grandfather. Kane didn't even know what it contained, as his grandfather had strictly ordered him not to open it. Head with his hands, the master vanishes into thin air, that is, he dies completely. Suddenly, Kane asserts his supreme authority and declares that no one will be above him. He unleashes a powerful surge of energy, proclaiming that he is everything in creation. Outside, sensing this immense power, the sword god. Sword wonders what Kane is trying to do, and notices that he has seemingly defeated his attacker. In front of him, the Beast King groans, questioning why the sword god is there. When the sword god asks if he has recovered his memories, the Beast King responds with confusion, looking at his hands in horror, and he laments attacking his own daughter. The sword god notices that the Beast King's hands are reverting to shadows and explains that the shadow puppets disappear along with the shadow world. Tente appears, confirming that she was also trapped in the shadow world, and attributes her injuries to Surin, the disciple of the sword god, praising his technique, which resembled the Beast King's style. Upon hearing that it was Sereno, the sword god is surprised. Tente informs him that, as the Beast King's shadow puppet, he doesn't have much time left. He suggests allowing him one last opportunity to say goodbye, and the sword god accepts. He informs him that C is on the 8th floor. Tente urges him to hurry. The sword god takes the Beast King to the 8th floor. Upon arriving, Cain observes as C asks what is happening. The Beast King sees her and calls out her name. She shouts, "Father," he gently confirms. He asked Emi to hand the box to Kale, saying that if Kale didn't want to see him after opening it, he would leave without complaint. Emi, a little curious, took his identity and tells her that he recognizes her as his daughter. Reaching out his hand, he manages to tell her that he loves her before completely fading into shadows. While she is crying, for his father, Cain tells him not to cry. He declares that, as the master of all creation, he refuses to accept such a tragic ending. He intends to correct this false reality with his own truth, and activates the reversal of the luminous world to restore Sorakasia to its state before the tragedy. The overwhelming darkness gives way to a bright light, and C comments on the sudden change. Cain explains to him that he has returned everything to the way it was before the dark world, assuring him that his loved ones are back and that he shouldn't be sad. Visibly moved, C thanks him through tears, internally reflecting that, despite his distant attitude, he always knew that Cain was a good person. Cain comments that he looks better and tells him that he has matters to attend to, who will take a short trip. With that, he faints. In a dark room, a mysterious woman greets him, remarking that she has been waiting for him. Cain is surprised to see her, and she explains that unexpected events occurred due to his grandfather's return. She invites him to sit down, saying that she wants to talk about the possibility of him accepting her, acknowledging that he already knows that her presence is like poison to him. She clarifies that, if he were to accept everything in the creation, her personality would absorb his. But her proposal isn't about seeking her own resurrection. Instead, she offers him all of her power and knowledge, without box, and went to find Kale. While Cain waited outside, another man approached him, calling him bothersome and a problematic customer. His words didn't affect her personality, in exchange for Cain teaching her about the unknown world that his grandfather returned to. Although Cain finds the conditions favorable, he rejects. The power surprises the woman. He explains that accepting everything within creation would prevent him from absorbing mana and negate the elixirs he has consumed. Furthermore, knowing the ultimate truth associated with that power would put his life in danger, as it already happened in the past. The woman reminds him that he offered her knowledge of a future in which he would avoid being killed by that man, something he was completely unaware of. She asks him if he still believes he doesn't need her. Convinced, Cain accepts the deal, but reaffirms his rejection of the power. She accepts this, and tells him that the first crucial step to prevent his prophesied death is to form an alliance with the Witch of the Third Continent. Later, Cain returns to the palace and wakes up in a room. Then we see him with C. She appears concerned, and offers to postpone the meeting with the Beast King. Cain assures her that he is fine, briefly recalling that he met the master of all creation, and then woke up in that room. He asks her how she feels regarding the illusory barrier. However, Sean doesn't remember anything, and Cain concludes that, because of his time reversal magic, no one remembers the Shadow World incident. He told the others that he simply dispelled a barrier, finding that explanation easier to understand. Returning to the present, they arrive at the Beast King's court. Sean thanks him profusely and, Cain, but what caught his attention was the sacred ring on the man's finger. He reacted immediately, stating that it radiated pure evil. Cain announces to everyone that he is the one who saved Sorakasia from the mysterious atomic barrier, insisting on giving him a reward. Cain initially refuses, stating that he didn't want a reward, but C and the Beast King insisted, pointing out that his family hated being in debt. Cain gratefully accepted, but mentions that his current journey prevents him from accepting anything too large. When C starts to ask about the mimic, Cain quickly puts his hand over her mouth, and asks her to keep it a secret. Just then, the Beast King was still standing in front of them, so Cain apologized for his rudeness. The Beast dismissed it, saying, "The royal family of Vistron is drawn to the strong," implying that his daughter was attracted by Cain. Then, the Beast King pondered aloud, questioning Cain's true strength, and suddenly challenged him to a duel, declaring that if Cain won, would approve of his relationship with C. Cain seemed surprised by the mention of a relationship, pausing for a moment in doubt, since no such connection even existed. Seeing this doubt, the Beast King provoked him, asking if he was running away out of fear, and demanding that he face him with honor if he was a man. Meanwhile, the Beast aggressively increased his energy. Cheval Bestran punched him in the torso, sending him crashing against the wall. Everyone was shocked by what he had done. Upon getting up, the Beast King commented on his daughter's apparent growth in power, wondering if her lineage had awakened. He noticed the mana surprised that no one else around him noticed it. The man scoffed and told him that if he really wanted to see Kale, he should spend money instead of unusual mana emanating from C's crown, and suddenly recognized it as the divine relic that had been stolen a decade ago. C panicked. Remembering Kane's request to keep it a secret, the Beast Queen reasoned that if his bloodline awakened without the aid of a full moon, then the crown must be a true divine relic. Murmurs began to circulate among those present regarding a prophecy that stated whoever was chosen by that relic would become the strongest warrior in Vistran's history. When the Beast King requested an explanation from Kane, he understood that he could no longer hide the truth about the crown. Just at that moment, Ryu Surin burst into the room, calling out for Kane and C, asking what they were doing over there. Confused, she mentioned that she thought the Beast King had disappeared. Kane asked her what she meant, and if she still remembered what happened in the world of shades. Feeling the need for privacy, Kane asked Ryu for a moment alone, and they withdrew. Once alone, Ryu asked him if he truly, everyone else had forgotten what had occurred. Kane confirmed that even the priestess and the sword god only remembered up to the point of seeing the dragon, heavenly. Ryu Surin asked why only the two of them remembered, and Kane admitted that he didn't know. Then, Ryu mentioned having a strange and unpleasant experience while unconscious. Changing the subject, Ryu Surin implored Kane to keep his victory over the Empress a secret, pulling such cheap tricks. He added that becoming a VIP customer would surely catch the artisan's attention, but looking at Kane's appearance, he doubted that. Celestial, implying that he achieved it by using forbidden techniques of the Vistran sword. Kane agreed to this. Wielding the Tenryu sword felt surprisingly natural, as if his bloodline had activated on its own. He reaffirmed his dedication to reaching the pinnacle of swordsmanship in order to honor his master. Kane then also asked her to keep Sorakazia's resurrection a secret, a request she agreed to without hesitation, remembering the advice that he needed the help of the witch from the third continent and that Ryu's conviction was key. Kane unexpectedly invited her to travel with him to that continent, presenting it as a valuable experience and mentioning a regional tradition. Ryu Surin, recognizing the rare opportunity to train alongside someone as powerful as Kane and to strengthen herself, agreed to accompany him. 2 days later, preparations for their departure began. He expressed his regret that he couldn't host them any longer, while the sword god commented that he needed to resolve the sword gate issue first. After saying their goodbyes and promising a grand welcome upon his return, Nariel told C it was a pity he couldn't join them, explaining that she had to stay behind to handle matters concerning the newly revealed sacred relic. With one final promise to meet again, Kane and Ryu departed, but shortly after they left, Kane clutched his chest in pain as a strange energy enveloped him. Despite the distance, "See, I had that kind of money?" Kane simply shrugged and responded, "Who knows? Even if I did have money, I wouldn't waste it on." Seemed to sense that something was wrong and called out his name. She noticed a peach scent just before Kane lost consciousness. Kane later woke up. Aboard a ship, listening to the sound of the waves, Ryu learned that Surin had been unconscious for 4 hours and had immediately arranged their departure, considering the urgency he had expressed, ignoring the attempts of others to stop them. Relieved, Kane thanked him, happy to have arrived in time. When Ryu asked him how he felt, Kane said he felt better than normal. Ryu found that strange, since he expected him to feel worse after the loss of his mana suppression. This prompted Kane to check, and he discovered a faint trace of mana returning, which surprised Ryu, who commented that his usual suppression was completely anomalous. Kane was also surprised, since Ryu hadn't noticed his complete absence of mana before, and he speculated in his mind whether it was related to the digestion of elixirs, and he promised to investigate it further later on. Their journey was then interrupted by a gigantic eye, appeared beneath the waves, followed by tentacles that struck the ship. A crew member raised the alarm, and Ryu Sereno attacked, attributing it to a sea beast, Marine. When Kane prepared to investigate, Ryu Sereno pointed outside again. They were exactly in the place that his grandfather had told him, long ago, back, to avoid at all costs. His grandfather had told young Kane that if he ever regained his mana, he should stay away from a sword from this store. There was no point in buying a weapon that couldn't withstand his strength. The man took it as a personal insult and challenged Kane to places, marking them on a map and emphasizing that the sea was the most dangerous of all. He warned him that even if he became much stronger, venturing into the sea would mean certain death. "Guys, I have to apologize because I got this girl's name wrong. Her name is Surin, not Surin. Sorry about that." Later, as an adult, Cain understood that his grandfather's warning was due to the existence of a sea monster, especially since one attacked him just as his mana returned. Attacked, leading him to believe that he couldn't handle it in his current state. Now, in the middle of the ocean, Cain understood that his only option against that immediate threat was to join forces with Sin, who had awakened. He suggested they go to the deck together, and she agreed. On deck, a man named Jason was caught and crushed by a huge tentacle. His companion shouted his name as more tentacles emerged from the sea, attacking everyone present. A girl cursed at the sight, intervened, cutting the tentacle with his sword and saving her. He told her to leave the fight to him and escape with her subordinates. The girl thanks him, and departs with the others. As the colossal sea monster continues its attack, the creature launches a barrage of water arrows, which Cain and Sauron watch as they descend before exploding on the deck. Cain notices that Sauron is having a difficult time and thinks that perhaps his overwhelming strength previously only worked in the shadow world. He warns him to be careful. He deduces that the monster is intelligent and is immobilizing them with the test one of his weapons, assuring him that he would take full responsibility if anything went wrong. Inside the store, Cain observed his surroundings until he monster and cast a Giga lightning spell, but one of the tentacles easily destroyed her six-circle magic, leaving her in shock. Cain. He attacks with water arrows, and then finishes them off with tentacles. As the tentacles break through the deck near Sauron, she exclaims that he is trying to board the ship. Realizing that the boat is doomed, Cain asks her if she knows how to use the water-walking technique. Answering no, because he is not her master, Cain picks her up and jumps off the disintegrating ship, saying that they will change their location. Sauron is surprised to see that Cain has mastered the technique of walking on water, but he dismisses it. As the monster's eye watches them, Cain declares that they will head to a nearby island, and they both run across the surface of the sea. Upon reaching dry land, Sauron asks him to put her down, and then asks if this place is safe. Cain admits it won't completely work, but it should weaken the monster compared to when it's in the open sea. As he doubts how they'll be able to face it, tentacles emerge from the monster for 3 seconds. Despite his doubts, Sauron agrees to try, and asks him not to waste the time that she will give him. As he charges toward the roaring monster, Cain remembers his grandfather's teachings. Control and mastery of mana are more important than the raw amount. With enough precision, one can accomplish extraordinary feats, like his grandfather, who parted the sea with barely a grain of mana, found a replica sword. It had an elegant appearance on the outside, clearly designed to fool those who didn't know much about swords, but it's poor mana. Cain decides to imitate that sword technique, focusing on the forgotten sensation of moving his mana. Meanwhile, Sauron fights against the surging, relentless tentacles ask him if he is ready. He decides to buy time by aiming for the monster's eye, its weakest point. However, just as the monster closes its eye, and it transforms into a mouth, Sin's strategy fails, and he is about to be devoured completely. Cain finally is ready. He apologizes for the delay, and launches a slash of concentrated green energy from his sword directly at the monster's eye. The attack cuts the creature in two and parts the sea behind it. Sauron is stunned to see that Cain was able to cut the sea with so little mana. However, Cain reflects that his technique is still far inferior to that of his grandfather, since the opening he made in the sea is much smaller. Confused by his self-criticism, Sauron asks him, What does Cain intend? Jeem is feeling dizzy, and Sauron realizes that she has exhausted all of her mana, so she advises him to rest. As they sit, the monster, seemingly defeated, shudders. Its eye focuses, and it utters an order, take him to that person. A tentacle suddenly grabs Cain and throws him into the sea. Sauron screams his name as he is dragged into the depths, where a disembodied voice declares that it has finally found him, calling him its successor. Sauron's voice calls out to Cain as she jumps into the water to save him as well. Then, he startles awake from a dream, where